A kid sat in front of his computer and tore through video games for hours. He'd been struggling for 10 long years. The very next morning, he bolted downstairs and plopped into his seat at the table for lunch. His mom snapped, asking if he'd landed a job because his dad couldn't keep working forever. She even pressed him, asking, "So what's your plan when we're finally gone?" Hearing that, rage surged in him, and he snapped at her that she was being unbearably annoying. She said he always started with, I've got it," like he meant it, then nothing ever changed. Frustration surged through him, and he shot up, admitted he had no appetite, then turned and walked off. He knew he was messing up, but after high school he slipped into a normal university, finished it, and at first everything felt fine, until the real nightmare finally kicked in. Even before graduation, he hustled nonstop, desperate to land a real job. But he still couldn't land a single one, and it crushed every last spark of motivation inside him. Friends started blowing up your phone, each one was sending, "I got a job offer." When they pressed him about his situation, disappointment crushed him, and it felt like he was getting brushed off while they ignored his answers. As he climbed the stairs, his mom dropped a juicy detail about the neighbor. Steady job, big success, and now a totally adorable little kid, too. Right on cue, a courier burst in, fresh package in hand. The boy hurried to the door, and when he saw the parcel sitting there, his whole body froze in pure shock. His mom swept in, full of curiosity, and grilled him about whether he was buying stuff, when he hadn't even got a penny. Then he blurted that he was probably about to win another prize since he hadn't bought a thing. He'd dive into online giveaways just to drown out the guilt of being jobless. But every now and then he'd hit a jackpot with adult stuff he couldn't possibly let his parents lay eyes on. So he decided to confirm the delivery himself. The courier leaned in and asked him to sign, and the boy clocked it, like the courier's giving him a weird, suspicious stare. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was because a man in his 30s was hanging around at home in the middle of a weekday. And when he glanced around, he caught everyone watching him a lot more boldly than they ever had. A tiny parcel sat in his mother's hands, and she peered at it like, "Is this food?" before she quickly turned away. He bolted into his room, tore open the parcel, and found a note tucked inside a disc, then stared at the label, "Village of Fate," wondering if it was some kind of game. He snatched up the note and read his fate. He'd been picked to test the game, packed with the newest AI tech, and built to be the first in the world to unleash characters that could think and move like real humans. He thought that claim sounded way too wild, so he kept reading the game's description and rules, then hit one condition that demanded he promise not to leak a single detail about it online. He couldn't believe there wasn't a real official agreement, like the whole promise was just a simple contract anyone could make. And the big catch was ruthless. He had to stay online the whole time, or if even one villager in the game died, he'd be locked out and never play again. That rule blindsided him, and he couldn't help but think it was way too brutal. Curiosity burned in him, so he typed "Village of Fate" into the search bar online. Yet nothing came up. He couldn't shake the feeling the game might be loaded with viruses, so he dragged it over to his old PC and hit play. If it turned out to be a prank, he figured he'd flip the whole thing into a Reddit joke and make it part of the fun. The moment he slid the disc in, the game's title exploded onto the screen. He smashed the enter key, and right then the first scene burst onto the screen. It blew everyone's mind with insanely crisp, high-definition graphics. It was better than anything he'd ever laid eyes on. He spotted a group of villagers packed into a carriage, and just like that, monsters come crashing in and attack them. He couldn't shake the feeling the villagers were about to be hunted down. A girl clutched a sacred holy book and kept chanting, "God of Fate," over and over, like she was begging the heavens for help. He jerked the cursor across the screen, praying the monsters wouldn't rip the horse apart. Suddenly, the driver of the carriage snapped into action, trying to defend it. A blazing, blinding glow erupted from the holy book. In seconds, the entire screen exploded into blinding light. Still totally baffled about what I just tapped. Next scene, you've got villagers laughing and chatting as they stand right in the middle of the forest. He figured this was the moment the real game was about to kick off. He zoomed the cursor over the characters and could instantly spot the twists in their pasts and why they became who they are. The carriage rumbled along with Gams at the reins. He was a 26-year-old swordsman built for steel and trouble. Kem, 19 years old and sworn to the god of fate, carried a holy book like it was a weapon, and she was Gam's little sister. He clocked that they didn't look like twins at all, and his brain immediately went, "Wait, is this game even Japanese?" Then he pictured the price tag and gulped, because with CG this slick it had to be worth a fortune and it would have gone viral online. He decided to leave it for later, because what really grabbed him was curiosity. He just had to see how the other characters were described. He scanned the last 3 characters and, boom, they were all from the same family, and that mystery sparked his curiosity as he started wondering what the game's controls even were. So he tore through the room again, hunting down the instruction paper like it was his only lifeline. He also realized the game wasn't fully voiced at all, as the dialogue burst onto the screen in plain text. In the game, Gams shot his friends an apology, swore it was his duty to guard the village. But during the monster attack, all he could do was blast a path and buy them a clean shot to get away. Carol, his little sister, burst out excitedly, asking about that bright light they'd just spotted, and Gams' other sister, leaned in and told Carol that it was Gams. While the boy was caught up in the game, he clocked that Gams was ridiculously handsome and built like a tank, and that he even had a beautiful sister, so the boy instantly figured Gams had to be the main character. Gams snapped at Chim that it was childish to treat Carol like that, and Chim quickly apologized. Carol burst into giggles, thrilled to see her sister get called out. The moment he got pulled in, he couldn't stop, because he loved those character personalities and the backstories that made every scene hit harder. Sheila, Rhodey's, and the rest of the crew couldn't stop staring at that weird light, wondering what it was hiding. Kem told everyone the eerie light wasn't magic. It spilled from the Bible she was gripping in her hands. Then the boy got a sharp instruction. Every single day he had to write a prophecy for the villagers, because now he wasn't just playing anymore. He was the god of the game, and his job was to lead them straight toward prosperity. When he scanned the instructions, shock hit him hard. He couldn't grasp them right away, so he figured the game only understood basic words or sentences, and that's why he typed one, thinking that if the AI could even catch a tiny sliver of that, it'd turn into an unreal game. As soon as he finished the prophecy and slammed enter, a blazing light erupted over the Bible. Kem slipped the cover open and dove straight into the pages. He told everyone they'd already gotten the prophecy straight from the god of fate. Everyone erupted in excitement and started bragging. Because only Kem could read it, they begged her to decode the prophecy for them. Kem Red issued a command that sent crews to harvest trees and carve out a safe place to live. Everything was spoken like a prophecy, and the boy was left totally stunned. He jerked back from his chair, staring in total disbelief. He never saw it working that flawlessly coming. Watching the crew actually get it, react fast, and answer back to what he wrote. He stared in shock, absolutely unable to believe tech this wild even existed. He caught himself thinking, if they can understand and react like this, then this game felt straight up impossible, like it couldn't possibly be real. He hesitated for a beat, convinced the characters were only chasing some. He was following the programmed moves, then he finally noticed something. They huddled up, plotting how to grab wood and lock in a spot to sleep, and roadies chimed in that they could fell trees straight from the forest. But they couldn't use the wood as proper timber right away because that he had to leave alone long enough for it to fully dry after being cut. Kem blinked in disbelief when he heard it, and even the kid running the game went wide-eyed, because he had no clue about that process either. Roadies broke down exactly how drying wood works, and Kem, still feeling kind of awful about it, admitted she hadn't looked into that before. The boy felt it too, then realized he didn't know much about it at all. Roadies then stepped in, shot down everyone's panic, and insisted God had a purpose behind it, so cutting the trees and letting them dry wasn't wrong at all. With that, they snatched up their tools and tore into the woods to start the job. The boy snapped to it. Gams and Roadies were the ones hacking down the trees, while the girls wandered around, hunting for anything they could eat. He realized he could crank the mouse scroll wheel and zoom in, and out of the scene anytime he wanted. As he tore down the slope, a long, skinny stretch of land snapped into view ahead, like the escape route they'd taken earlier on that carriage. He started asking himself how he could even move forward in the game, and then wondered if it was secretly running in real time. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He swore to himself that no game like this could exist. Suddenly, the screen flashed an explanation about fate points. These points were handed out based on one thing, how deeply the villagers felt they owed the god of fate, and that god was him. He glanced down and saw he had exactly 97 points, and the right points could spark miracles, and the rules were simple. The longer he stayed, the more fate points he racked up. Then if he kept the villagers smiling, his points climbed even higher. Curiosity sparked in him as he scanned the list of miracles you could pull off. Some of these acts even stitched escaped villagers back together, while others somehow dragged in a wandering peddler or a doctor right on time. He finally understood it could nudge destiny, yet it never had the power to wrestle people's choices under its control. He could command the weather like it was his to command, and that power hit him so hard it felt like he was a god. Stuck with only a little to his name, he couldn't figure out where to spend it first. With the pieces in place, he tuned in tight to every word the villagers were trading, hunting for the perfect way to use them. He zoomed over to GAMS and ROTUS, and saw ROTUS scrambling to get words out. Gams kept mum, barely giving anything away. Can't resist the curiosity. He swung the screen right toward the girls to catch what they were whispering about. And he caught them mid-conversation, all fired up about food. He figured summoning a peddler was the smart move. If he showed up, he could stock them up with food, and then the villagers dropped the bombshell. They only had 2 weeks left, and they'd heard that. He figured he should order Gams to scout that area tomorrow, but then he froze. Because what if sending their only fighter away was a terrible move? He thought about using Carol, since she wasn't doing much, to explore and widen the visible area. Then Carol suddenly grabbed a mushroom, and Layla snapped, telling her to drop it right now because it was poisonous. Seeing it all unfold, the boy's mind snapped. If his reckless moves doomed the villagers, guilt would crush him, so he searched for some other miracle he could unleash to save them. He spotted a miracle named Familiar, and immediately wondered if using it could blow open the map's visible area. Then he spiraled over one brutal detail. Every dog or cat would set him back 300 fate points, and he didn't have a single one to spare. As he bowed his head, he felt the weight pressing down on him like it was more than just a game. You'd spot it, another way to pump up your fate points. A payment system that makes everything click instantly. He suddenly saw it, pay just 1,000 yen and he could grab 10 fate points, which crushed him. Traded him like a piece of junk, because he wasn't bringing in a single coin. He figured that for 20,000 yen, he could snag a cat or dog, and with the right points in hand, he'd make sure every villager could live easy. Then he glanced at his bank account. Right there, the damage hit, and he realized he had only 10,852 yen. He suddenly started thinking about selling his books, his games, open online prize apps, and rake in more money. After chewing it over, he snapped back to the game, and right then he noticed that. At 9 o'clock, the whole village finally wound down, ready to crash and fall asleep. Roadies leaned in and demanded, "Gams, why aren't you going to bed?" And Gams stammered. That meant someone had to keep their eyes open all night, just in case a monster slipped in. Then Rodas leaned in and promised him, "With God's power backing us, no monsters getting anywhere near here." The boy finally understood how hard the villagers had bet on him, but he knew he didn't have the kind of powers they were expecting. He wrestled with the urge to tell them their God was unbelievably powerful, yet still had strict limits. But he feared that helping them like this would chip away at their faith and gratitude for him. He dove into the game and started studying how the wood got processed, chunk by chunk, like it held the secret to everything. He couldn't believe how long it had been since he'd cared about something like that. Lately, he hasn't done a thing except binge entertainment videos and scroll non-stop through funny Reddit posts. He couldn't stop wondering, if he didn't actually need it, could he use it to make life easier and kinder for the villagers? Suddenly, he shot up like it hit him in the chest. He'd been replaying his past over a stupid game, and it wasn't fun anymore. You know, that's not how games are supposed to feel, right? As he dropped back into his seat, a brutal jolt tore through the scar across his stomach, and it instantly dragged back a brutal memory. He still remembered the moment his little sister was in real danger, and he just jumped into a street fight with a boy. That kid drove a blade into him, right in the gut, no mercy. A knife dug into his stomach. Right then, he slipped away and left something behind. He left everything behind and bolted for his life. And right there, everything exploded into motion. Going downhill, tears burned in his eyes as he pushed back from the chair, convinced the only thing left was to drown himself in gaming since it felt like nothing else even mattered anymore. The next morning, he shot his eyes open, and daylight was already flooding the room. He remembered scrolling through wood manufacturing last night, but he nodded off without even catching it. He glanced at the clock. 7 a.m. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd ever woken up that early. He strode to his computer and froze. Every single player in the game was already up, already grinding. It hit him hard that the villagers weren't some illusion. They were living in real time. He started obsessing over what prophecy to drop on them next, but then his thoughts. His stomach growled loud, right in the middle of everything, and it hit him fast. He was starving, and he only ate dinner last night because he'd been glued to the game the whole time. He scanned the room, and the empty snack wrappers stared back at him. Turns out even the last bites were gone. So you hustled downstairs, clocking the fridge like it might still hide something good. Right as he headed into the kitchen, He heard his family cracking up over breakfast at the dining table. Ever since that brutal incident with his little sister, he'd been locked in a massive fight with his dad over getting a job, and they hadn't spoken face-to-face since. For a split second, he pictured himself walking in with a grin, sliding into their conversation, and asking if he could join them for breakfast. Then it hit him. This idea was ridiculous, because everyone was stuffing themselves to power through the day, grinding hard like their lives depended on it. With no job and nothing to show, how was he supposed to stand there and face them? He spun around, marched back to his room, and started hammering out muscle exercises. He recalled that one time he bolted in fear, and now he felt the urge to crush the lingering weakness still gnawing at his chest. During training, he shot a quick look at his computer screen and spotted Carol right there, teaming up with the others. Everyone else looked happier than him, like the whole thing was just a game and nothing really mattered. He sat there thinking, and even though it was virtual, they were living fuller, brighter lives than he ever managed. Guilt clawed at his chest, so he rushed to warn them, don't put your hopes in an incompetent god like him. So he scribbled the prophecy of the day. They'd gotten the prophecy, and the whole village crowded around her, buzzing with excitement to hear every word. When she finished reading it, a crushing silence swallowed the room. The boy's chest tightened with nerves, terrified they'd turned their backs on their god. He sounded like he was just making excuses, and regret crushed his chest for sending that message. Then Chen shattered the silence, gushing that their god was still keeping a watchful eye over them, like nothing could slip past his sight. Rotus warned that maybe their god had drained his power from all the battles against the devils, and that the prophecy was being taken as good news, not doom. And his fate points climbed to 110. Then he realized the numbers were creeping way too slowly, because at that pace, he'd never be able to buy his people a better life anytime soon. He caught them chatting about how miserable it was to sleep out in that wagon. They begged for a defense wall, anything to stop the monsters from tearing into them. And as he listened to their panic, he swore he needed more fate points. But he couldn't afford to squander a single one of the few things he had. To get more fate points, you had exactly one path, the game's payment system. He'd already lined up his unopened stuff for sale, fully expecting to rake in 20,000 to 30,000 yen. He stared at his books and thought, if I sell these, I'll finally get some cash. But the catch was he stood outside for the first time in months. But he knew one truth. If he didn't pay this price, the villagers would get crushed, and he'd never get to play the game again. After replaying it all in his head, he finally chose to step outside, then threw on his nicer clothes, and for the first time they fit like a glove, even though he hadn't gained a single pound. As a kid, he pictured himself blossoming into a polished adult in his 30s, like it would just happen on its own. Now he vowed to himself, tomorrow he'd jump right back into the game. Right when he was about to leave, he went and sucked. Carol and the game collide. She goes down hard and ends up injured. Seeing her struggle tore at his heart. Even with her injury screaming in pain, she grabbed her wood sticks and pushed forward, refusing to stop. He also clocked that every single player in the game looked. Still tired, they realized today felt way harder than anything they'd faced before. With pure determination, he snatched his bag of books and told himself, I'll give it everything I've got too. Right as he reached the door, his mom's eyes widened. She asked if he was leaving and blurted, what's going on? He just dropped, I'll be back in a jiffy, and vanished off. He grabbed his bicycle and tore out onto the road. People stared at him like he was about to snap, judging him as he stormed past, thinking of the villagers in his head. He cranked the pedals harder and faster. Before long, he burst into the bookstore, scanned the shelves, and couldn't help but wonder if he could only track down a book that might teach him how to run those villagers. You spot a mysterious book packed with stories from all kinds of worlds. But then he realized it didn't match what was happening in the game at all. And on top of that, there was no way he could cough up the money for anything brand new. After he sold his old books, he stepped out, and there it was, the bakery he used to F***K. He hurried over to spend time with his family. He marched right into the shop and chased down the desserts with his eyes. He snatched up 4 puddings and bolted back home. When he thrust those into his mom's hands, she started. He smirked, asked if those were for her, and when he said he had plenty to go around, he bolted to his room, cheeks burning with embarrassment, thinking, why am I so proud over just one tiny good deed? Stuck wondering what he was even doing with his life at that age. After dropping 20,000 yen, he finally unlocked the 310 fate points, like the game was begging him to stop now. He watched the villagers fire up the pots, then settle in together for dinner like one tight, warm circle. He couldn't stop wondering, What miracle was he going to unleash next? He had this handy feature to scroll through their old conversations, but it made his stomach twist, like he was eavesdropping on something he wasn't meant to hear. Still, he decided to put it to the test. The second he clicked it, the past crashed into his ears. He could hear their voices from earlier, chatting about the perfect weather, and Layla even saying she wanted to go bathe in the river. Kim cut in right away, saying there were tons of guys all around. Layla shot a mischievous wink and teased through her grin like, "Relax, I've got nothing to hide." Because her husband and daughter had seen it all before, and she even laughed that Gams wouldn't even look her way, not with a body like an old lady. She added that Carol wouldn't care if Gams saw her too, so everything was totally fine. After hearing that, he convinced himself he might not have to stress so much about Layla or Carol, until Kem's brother complex hit him, and it was way more serious than he ever imagined. Suddenly he saw it. Layla was asking about that monster swarm that had wrecked their village, and when she said the villagers were scattered in the blink of an eye, Yashio froze, baffled about which day she meant. As he kept listening, it hit him. Those voices weren't talking about just any place. They were talking about a village carved entirely from magnificent stone. Curiosity sparked, and he dug for more answers until he finally uncovered that there. Once, there were nearly 100 villagers living there. After the monster tore through everything, they all got hammered into a full-on retreat, scrambling onto horse-drawn wagons and fleeing for their lives. Just like the ride they were rolling in right now. That's when it clicked. This miracle wasn't for show. It was meant to reunite the villagers. It was supposed to reunite every villager who'd fled and gotten scattered, and right as he started dreaming about bringing them back together, his mother shouted from the other room. Dinner was ready. He stormed into the dining room and froze. His father was already sitting at the table. I couldn't believe it. He was home way earlier than I ever expected. Ever since he became a need, they only managed to meet face-to-face a couple times a month, that was it. He tried to kick off a conversation, but his father shot it down cold. Then he just asked whether Seiyuki, his younger sister, was stuck working overtime. While he was falling behind, Seiyuki busted her ass, and made it into the very field she'd been chasing, and she'd always shrug off late nights like they didn't even bother her. Their mother then told him she'd gotten some handmade tsukemono from Akiku and asked if he wanted to try them, then added that the weather was perfect. So she took a quick stroll in the park, bumped into Akiku, and before he knew it, they were shopping together. Akiko was a sharp old landlady who ran a giant, creaky house right down the road. Back when he was just a kid, she'd always show up with a pocket full of candy. He finally understood the real reason he wasn't getting thrown out. His father busted his ass every day and brought home steady money. After he tore through his meal, he thanked his parents and pushed his chair back. Then his mom shoved a pudding into his hands and asked his dad if he wanted dessert too, bragging that their son had picked it up just for them. His father mumbled like it didn't matter, then said he'd have some. Crushed by disappointment, he stormed back to his room and started scouring the game to check on the villagers. He clocked that every single person was already over at the horse wagons, except Gams. Gams stood out as the steady force everyone could count on, quietly strong, just like his own father. Kem could cast healing magic, but she wasn't built for fights, so Kem and every villager leaned hard on gems to get by. You could summon even more allies, but it drained so many points that it just wasn't worth it. Sure, there was a cheaper way to summon a random person, but it felt like playing with fire. If that stranger was a criminal or worse, you'd be screwed. He decided that gamble wasn't worth it, and he saved his points for something he already knew, so he held back, waiting for the right familiar moment. Realizing this game was crushing him with stress, he figured sleep was the smarter move, then decided to tackle everything tomorrow. Right when he was seconds away from rising off his cherry, a notification suddenly blared onto the screen. And just like that, the village of fate stepped in and saved him. He practically yelled for everyone to wake up, threw out chimp-like alarm, and demanded to know what the heck was going on. Gams snapped that monsters were tearing through the area, and she warned everyone, "Don't you dare step out of the wagon, no matter what." Rhodey snapped at his wife and daughter to stay inside the wagon because the danger was real, and Gams, still steady, promised everyone he had it under control. And tell Kem to stay on standby with her healing magic, just in case things go sideways. Yashio's nerves were on fire. Everything was so dark he couldn't spot a single monster, and he had zero clue where they were lurking. Suddenly, two long, straight dogs shot into view. Yashio realized the new games were absolutely blasting. But with two on him and only one move, panic crushed his chest and anxiety spiked to the max. He thought about calling in a miracle for help, But before he could even move, everything went sideways. Monsters come crashing in, and Gams is forced to fight back. Gams slammed back with a sword so hard it was unreal, and he actually managed to cut down both of them. After the fight, Gam collapsed onto the log, completely drained. His sister sprinted up with a bright smile, asking if he was okay. Then suddenly, Gems collapsed, and every single person hit the brakes, faces frozen in pure shock. Yashio roared his name out, stunned by how perfectly he'd won. His sister started sobbing, clutching him to her chest like she'd never let him go. Panic slammed into her like a wave, shouting that Gam's body was going ice cold. Outside the screen, Yashio was frantically trying to crack what in the world was going on. Rhodys pressed 2 fingers to his pulse and tried to steady her, like he could force her panic to stop. He spotted bite marks on Gam's arm and instantly realized something was coming, right before the truth cut him off. The monster's bite sank poison into his veins. Rhodys leaned in and begged Kem to let her use antidote magic. Yashio finally began to loosen up, convinced her healing magic would set everything right. Then Shem dropped the bombshell. She hadn't learned any antidote magic yet. Rhodys pleaded, asking if any antidotes were stashed in their supplies. Then Gan just shook his head, cutting the hope right off. And it was clear they had none. Carol froze in pure shock, staring like she couldn't possibly believe her eyes. Kem sobbed and pleaded with her brother, begging him to stay and not leave her. In sheer panic, she screamed at God, begging for an answer that never came, begging anyone for help to rescue her older brother, and swearing she'd do anything it took. Yashio's stomach dropped into panic, and he didn't know what move to make next. If Gams dies, it's game over, everything ends. And he couldn't help wondering, was there anything at all he could do? Fists clenched, he forced himself to breathe, because he was the god in this game, no matter what. Then he tore through the options, scrambling to find that reversal button before everything spiraled. Then he stumbled on a miracle called. The traveling doctor crashes in, and that visit costs a whopping 300 fate points sat there like a loaded gun. He hesitated, torn apart by the question, what if the doctor didn't make it in time? One wrong move and it all turned into a gamble. He erupted into frustrated shouting, terrified of how this would end. Then out of nowhere his mom thundered from downstairs, yelling at him to shut up. And as soon as he caught how loud he'd been, he panicked. Because if a doctor actually turned up in the dead of night, the villagers would definitely read it as something shady. After a quick spiral of doubt, Yashio made his choice. He decided to go all in and use the miracle. A traveling doctor suddenly burst into the village. Chim was hit with a jolt of shock, then rage exploded. He demanded to know exactly who this guy was. With a calm smile, the doctor told them to stop panicking, then introduced himself as a traveling physician. Yashio grinned, convinced it was only natural they'd eye him with suspicion. To calm their fears, he unveiled the prophecy and let the words ring out. Heck, a prophecy hits this late at night, and it leaves him utterly stunned. Read it with a full heart, thank God like you mean it. Then the doctor leaned in and demanded to uncover gems, and everyone leaned in with bated breath, staring like their lives depended on it. He yanked out the antidote and pressed it straight onto Gam's wound. Gems finally started to feel better, one breath at a time. His pain finally drained away, his body cooled back to normal, and everyone let out a breath of relief, cheering when they saw Gams fighting his way back. Yashio finally let out a deep breath and felt the tension melt away. I even caught myself wondering if the doctor was a man or a woman. Meanwhile, Rhodys started reading the prophecy out loud. Yashio had spelled out how he led the doctor right to them, and he reminded everyone that even though the fight wouldn't stop, they had to remember one thing. Their god was watching over them. Yashio, desperate to sound like a real god, couldn't help wondering how it would land. When he saw the villagers smiling, relief hit him hard, like he'd finally proved he could do right by them. The very next day, the girls fanned out to grab ingredients for their food, while Rhodys drilled his moves in steady practice. Training with his sword to keep everyone safe, he suddenly heard a rabbit rustle through the bushes. The sudden noise jolted Rhodys so hard, he lost his footing and crashed to the ground. Meanwhile, the doctor hurried to mix and prep the herbs for Gamsa's treatment. Suddenly, Chim snapped, "Why did you come this way, Doc?" And the doctor. He told me his family had been doctors for generations, and this place, the Forbidden Forest, was crawling with monsters, but packed with rare herbs too. Last night, after he finished gathering herbs and got camp ready, a blinding light flared in the distance, and he froze. Then his doubts melted, and he marched toward it. Kem flashed a grin and swore it had to be God's guiding hand. The doctor said they loved nature more than anything and didn't really buy into God. but then admitted it might have been an act of God anyway. Yashio clocked that the doctor was agnostic. He didn't slam the door on God, but he also didn't honestly buy it. Kem leaned in and demanded the doctor tell him, were they leaving soon? The doctor snapped back that he wouldn't ditch his patient, even after the worst had passed. And then he grinned and asked if they'd let him stay a little longer because he had time to spare and he'd stay as long as they wanted. She said they didn't have real shelter yet and asked, straight up, if he was still okay with it. Yashio grinned, relieved the doctor would stay close. Then the reality hit him. With the doctor inside, the wagon was packed and someone was going to have to sleep out in the cold. Even with Gams saved, he still wouldn't be back to 100% right away. It'd take a few grueling days for him to fully recover. Moishio then realized he had to carve out a safe place to live, and he started plotting how to spend his fate points with deadly precision. Then the doctor snapped his head toward them and said there was a cave nearby, an old miner's ruin, perfect shelter from the wind and rain, and maybe even a few leftover tools still sitting there. Yashio finally exhaled when the doctor admitted he knew a place like that. Roadies, buzzing with excitement, grabbed the doctor's attention and demanded he guide them straight to the cave. Yashio spotted it. This cave was just a quick 5-minute run from where they stood, so they could swoop back anytime and grab more wood if they had to. They finally burst into the cave and stared straight ahead at a massive door blocking their way. The doctor pointed to that door and said it was probably the route they used to move people and goods. The goods were right there, like the main entrance had been waiting to be found. Yashio felt it had to be a mining zone. When they yanked the door open, they were just about blown away, because what they saw was by a colossal space tearing open inside. Everyone's face lit up like they just got the best news ever. Yashio nearly choked, because it was way bigger than he ever imagined. Even though it was kinda grimy, there were a bunch of rooms scattered all over the place. He clocked it immediately. Everyone was so lost in exploring their brand new home that they didn't even notice anything else. They never even looked at the doctor. Kem set Gams down on the bed, grabbed his hand, and breathed. We made it safe in this new land. Nearby, fresh spring water gushed along, and there were spots right there to cook whatever you wanted. The girls were raring to go, time to tear into cleaning that place. Yashio felt a lifetime of gratitude crash into him when that doctor helped them secure a place to stay. While the doctor kept battling to heal Gems, Jim stormed outside and demanded everyone shut up because he was trying not to get woken up. She told them to clean the whole place so Gams would wake up to a shock. Layla snapped at Roadies to toss anything that didn't matter, and Roadies immediately agreed. He said he was going to toss those items in the corner. While she was cleaning, Carol suddenly spotted 4 rooms, grinned, and yelled that she'd take Big Brother Gam's room, because one bed was all she needed since she was going to sleep there with him. Kem peered at her from the shadows, stunned. Why in the world would Gams hand over his room to Carol instead? She caught herself thinking that Gams had spoiled Carol way too much. Yashio couldn't shake a little worry about Carol and Chim, but he figured they mostly had each other's backs as fellow villagers. And then it hit him. Now that they could turn that cave into a place they could actually live in, they could finally start building their village for real. He checked the clock and gasped. Noon already, and he hadn't eaten a single bite, so hunger hit hard and he bolted off to grab some food. Right as he stepped out of his room, he suddenly spotted his sister, Seiyuki, stepping out of hers at the same time. He was left completely stunned. Then he asked Seiyuki, "Were you off on holiday?" She snapped back that she was heading downstairs for food, then shoved him out of the way with pure anger. While he said he was going to the first floor too, she shot back, "Don't you dare use the bathroom down there." That news punched his temper even harder, yet ever since that incident, she never treated him the same way again. He said nothing, just gave her a promise with his silence, swearing he'd never use it. After he finished eating, he stormed back to his room, stuck on his sister's face and everything she meant. He still remembered when they were close like family, always pulling each other along to unwind and breathe. He couldn't stop thinking, if that incident had happened, would they still have stayed close like real siblings? A sharp ache twisted his stomach as the truth hit. He had to keep moving because regret was chewing him up right now, and still, there was nothing left he could fix. Then he sprinted to check on the villagers, and what he saw made his stomach drop. They scrubbed the whole place clean until it shines. Roadies leaned in and demanded to know where Kem was, and Layla snapped back that Kem was making the rounds, checking in on Gams. Carol blurted that she wanted to come too, but Roadies snapped at her to back off and give them some space. With a grin, he urged her to stick close to her dad and jump into the cave expedition with him. She nodded and promised, Once my big brother's back on his feet, I'll take him on a proper tour. Meanwhile, Chim burst into the room and demanded. She sprinted to become a doctor, anything it took so she could finally take care of her brother. Doctor urged him to rest, and when she checked him, she said the poison's symptoms finally calmed down, so she'd take Cam's offer. She told Kem, "Summon me the instant anything weird happens." Jem shot the doctor a quick thank you, then gripped her brother's hand and made it crystal clear. She wasn't leaving him alone. Yashio burst with relief when he saw Gam's condition finally start to turn around. Suddenly, a dream box dropped from the sky right above Gam's. He tapped it and the screen flipped into a whole new world. Suddenly, everything snapped to a new scene. Then Yashio spotted a younger Gams. He got wrapped up in a whole squad of friends, all buzzing with "Come on, let's grab drinks." Gams politely shut it down, saying he was. He rushed home because his sister was waiting right there for him. Yagio couldn't believe it. Gams was actually wasting such precious, innocent time of his life. When Gams finally stumbled into his house, he found his dad downing drink after drink, and that's when a wave of rage hit. Because Gams was so annoyed, he snapped that he was. He downed another drink, then snapped a bottle and hurled it straight at him. Then he shoved a pot of coins into his father's hands, the very payment he'd promised for keeping an eye on Kem while he was busy working. Gams demanded, "Where's Kem?" then bolted downstairs, only to end up fighting her while she's in a horrible condition, lying there. He froze in shock and demanded to know how many days she'd gone without a single bite. Yashio hit with the same gut-punch shock, his mind screaming whether this was straight-up child abuse. Gam's rage kept climbing as he snapped that they should have left this place way earlier. Then he turned to walk off when his father lunged in to stop him, grumbling that it was all just careless, drunk mistakes, and swore to Gams that he'd keep his promise from now on. But Gams scooped up his sister and snapped at his father to get out of the way, because if he didn't, he'd die. Gams stormed out of the house and Chim shot after him, yelling, "Where are we going?" He snapped back, "Anywhere but home." She snapped that if they didn't hurry, their father would lose it for real. Then Gams tried to calm her, saying they'd never see him again anyway, so there was nothing to fear. Kem shot back that maybe Mom and Dad hated her for being a bad girl, always getting scolded, until Gams erupted, barking that it wasn't true at all. They were the problem, not her. He reminded them of that brutal day their parents promised to sell Kem because she was bad and useless, and at least then she'd have some use. Only now Yashio realized they were trapped in an even worse nightmare than he'd ever imagined, and Gams snapped at Kem to stop calling there past her parents' name anymore. He swore he'd protect her, then begged her to move in with him, just for both of them to enjoy life and smile every day. Kem grinned and wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "I love you, big brother." Then the screen snapped back to the present, and Yashio finally understood why Shem carried that big brother complex. Because with a brother that cool, it was only natural she'd cling to him. Suddenly, Gam snapped his eyes open and asked if he'd scared his little sister. Kem's tears burst out as she clung to him, overwhelmed with relief that he was finally talking. Everyone else rushed to the door, grinning that Gams was awake. Yashio felt that same wave of relief, like peace finally landed for them, because he knew the whole group was hanging on Gams. He was the kind of guy everyone gravitated toward, handsome, built strong, and impossible not to like. Yashio was sure the bond between Kem and Gams would never, ever break. As he spiraled over every messy, complicated feeling he had for his sister, he suddenly gasped and realized tears were pouring down his face. He hit a wave of shock. Tears were pouring out of him. So he let out a shaky little laugh and wondered if he'd regretted everything so hard that it finally broke him, because deep down he knew he really wanted to change. Through the glass, he watched his dad and his sister walk off together, side by side, pulling him further into dread. As they stepped out the door, she leaned in and demanded, "So, are you wearing the necktie I gave you?" Her dad grinned and asked if it looked weird, and she smiled right back, telling him it fit him perfectly. After he watched them vanish, he stomped over to his computer, and there was, cooking up meals with Carol's help, like we were racing the clock. While the doctor and Gams were out patrolling, you swept your eyes around and grinned. Everything was already set up just right, with the equipment and cozy furnishings needed for life to feel comfortable. 3 days after they crawled into that cave, and somehow, life snapped into place in a way that felt unbelievable. Using that miracle felt completely worth it. Meanwhile, Gems stared down a huge boar right in front of him. He came storming forward, and the charge hit him like a punch. But Gam snapped out of the way just in time, dodging the hit. Suddenly, a razor thin. The board swung in and knocked it clean out. The arrow's shooter wasn't some mystery guy. It was Dr. Mully's himself, and he strode right up to Gams, warning him, "Don't overdo it while you're still recovering." Yashio stared at the doctor's name, Mully's, and realized that was all there was. No history, no background, just that single name. Not only could he whip up insane potions, but he was also a dead-eye archer. So yeah, he was the perfect partner for Gams. And on top of all that, Molas could wield magic to twist plants to his will, and he was the one who guided them straight to the cave. Yashio was begging for Molas to stay for good in the village, but beneath the doctor's background details, there was nothing but one single box marked secret. Yashio couldn't shake the weird feeling that Molas still hadn't shown up, especially since he'd already dropped a whopping 30,000 yen on the game. He finally clocked it. This game wasn't nearly as simple as he'd first believed. After that, they hauled back to the cave, and Chiam burst into gratitude, thanking them for the patrol, while Carol practically tackled the moment with an excited, "Welcome home." Gams and Mullies dropped the fresh boar meat in Layla's hands after their hunt, and Layla nearly exploded with joy. Dinner was set. She shot them a warning. They were running low on seasoning and salt, the stuff you need to cook and preserve the meat, and Yashio couldn't shake the worry. He realized that even with all those natural crops growing around the cave, they still couldn't live on luck alone. They needed a steady food source, like a real farm. He paced, weighing whether to call in a peddler for seeds and all the supplies they'd need. But there's another miracle waiting in the wings, called. A golem, massive, rock-bodied, humanoid, slammed into his attention, and he couldn't stop staring as he realized just how big it was. He took control of it himself with his controller, and it felt absolutely electrifying. Spawning a golem hits you with a 700-point summoning price, basically 70,000 yen in real-world cash. As spotless as Yashio was, he couldn't believe he was expected to pay that much, especially when he'd only racked up 160 points so far. He raked in 10 points every day from the villagers, so he'd be stacking up enough points in just about 2 to 3 months. He stared at his balance and realized he'd already burned through every last coin in the game. As Yashio watched the villagers dig into their dinner, laughter filling the air, he finally felt his shoulders loosen. He shot up from his chair, ready to brew himself a cup of coffee. He poured himself coffee, letting a wave of relief wash over him. Then worry crept in right behind it. Fresh coffee in hand, Yashio stepped back in and watched the villagers at work. Then his eyes snapped to the chimp and Gams, who'd been huddled together for days, silently building something, and now he couldn't stop wondering what on earth it was. Kem practically breathed out, "It's almost done," then shot Gams a question, "Does this look disrespectful?" Gams finally cracked and showed what they'd been cooking up. A statue still, silent, and suddenly way too important. Gams leaned in and reassured Shem. The only thing that truly counted was what they felt, and he was sure their thoughts would reach God, who was watching them every second. Mullies leaned in and demanded, "Is that a statue of God?" And Kem shot back, "Yeah, confirmed." Even though the craftsmanship was rough as anything, they still needed a place to worship and make their offerings. Yashio snapped to it. He just realized the statue was made for him. Since it was carved so messily, you couldn't even tell if that figure was male or female. Then he started wondering, what kind of god of fate is gendered anyway? And as Kem placed fruits before the statue, the offerings vanished right in front of them. Yashio suddenly understood that God really existed in there. The fact that the offerings were disappearing didn't even shock me that much. He also clocked that his fate points had shot up right after the offering. When he read the instructions, his eyes widened. Because every offering made to him didn't just please him, it directly boosted his fate points too. Yashio chose to sit down with the villagers and pitch offering things they don't even need, but he didn't want to weigh them down or sound pushy, so he leaned in and dropped a prophecy on them like a bombshell. Him offering to hand over unnecessary items to him, explaining that he could twist their goods and thoughts into real miracles. He couldn't help smiling. He nailed the wording so it didn't sound like begging or barking orders. The villagers cheered as they read the message, their faces lighting up with bright smiles. But Yashio couldn't shake the worry that their innocence might put them in danger. He couldn't shake the thought that in modern Japan, people like them could fall for scams in a blink or get swept into some shady cult. Then it hit him. What if they were already tangled up in something just like this, and they didn't even realize it? The very next day, Yashio saw Gams and Roadies roll up to him, offering him a huge lung and acting like it was no big deal. Then it hit him. They could hand over even something enormous like that, and the joy on their faces while they served their god was impossible to miss. As the villagers hurriedly braided their ropes and pressed their offerings into their hands to give them away to, he glanced at the sky and realized, man, it was already past noon. Time sprinted away as he kept grinding through the game. Right then, his mom burst in with a call. His parcel had finally arrived. He lunged downstairs and found the message, straight from the village of fate. Figuring it was just a page they forgot to send earlier, he muttered to himself, like the truth had to be hiding there. His mom couldn't resist. Before he could even stop her, she tore into the parcel and Yashio snapped, "Don't open it like that," because he had no idea what was inside. The second she cracked it open, they were staring at weird, unsettling fruits piled inside. They looked like bears at first glance, but their bodies blazed red like apples fresh off the tree. Yashio's jaw dropped, because right in front of him were the exact fruits the villagers had handed him the day before. His mom, assuming those weren't random items but some fancy exotic fruit he'd ordered, announced they'd smash them for dessert that night. He caught that sweet scent in the air and realized there was a faint burst of citrus lingering nearby. Not a hint of fake crossed his mind. Thinking about how the villagers loved them, he finally tore off a bite and tasted it. He took a bite expecting nothing, and it totally blew him away, the most delicious fruit he'd ever tasted. He figured the game's creators probably meant it as a little thoughtful nod, maybe just a normal fruit from some far-off country. Either way, he didn't complain a bit. He was too busy savoring every delicious bite. With a satisfied grin, he stormed back to his computer and hammered out a fresh prophecy for the villagers. He thanked them for the fruits and told them not to worry. If they didn't have anything more to spare, they didn't have to offer a thing. He leaned in and told them, "Put yourselves first always." With a grin on his face, he imagined the day he'd finally save up enough points to snag a golem, and then he'd be able to boost their fight way more than before. His mother's voice suddenly cut through the house, sharp and irritated, yelling for him to come downstairs like he'd better move right now. He sprinted to the door and spotted a log sitting right on the doorstep. To the haunting mark of the village of fate. His mother demanded, "So what are you doing with it?" And he just froze, because it was the exact same log the villagers had handed him the day before, and he knew right then the joke had gone way too far. He grabbed the log to pull it along, then instantly realized it was way too heavy. His mother shot him a question, asking what he planned to do with it, and he shot back, "I'm moving it to the garden." Remembering that, she pushed him to use it for muscle training. As she strained under the weight, he couldn't help thinking about how brutal it must be to make gams and roadies day in, day out with work that heavy. He just couldn't treat this like a real problem, and the idea of filing a complaint with the game company kept nagging at him. When he dug into the details, there was no contact number anywhere, and the return address hit him like a punch, Hokkaido. He couldn't wrap his head around it. They really went all the way to send something like this from Hokkaido. He went digging online for the company's info, but the internet came up empty. Then he even pulled up the address from the package on his laptop, only to find a tiny little building, and that's when doubt hit hard. How could something that small possibly make a game this good? He started to suspect the real development happened somewhere else, because that company was locked down tighter than a vault. Either way, he couldn't pay to get there, and he didn't have the nerve to march up to them in person, so he plopped down there staring at the log like, "What am I even supposed to do with you?" The very next day, he finally got the cooler that the villagers sent his way. That the inside was packed with something so unreal it hit you like a punch. Monster slain, they dragged in fresh meat like it was treasure. He was absolutely stunned, and she got totally blindsided because her mom didn't expect that at all. She snapped, demanding to know whether he was throwing his money at something shady. Nervous but determined, he finally blurted out that he'd cooked up a plan to breathe new life into the village. And once the villagers got it, they were so grateful they started showering him with gifts on a regular basis. To his utter shock, she lit up with excitement and called it amazing. And when she actually believed him, his jaw dropped even harder. He shoved the boar meat into her hands and urged her to cook it up. She locked her eyes on the meat, like it was about to change everything. She was completely baffled, staring at it in disbelief, thinking, how could she possibly pull off something like that? Ever since that day, he started getting a fresh daily delivery from the village of fate. Packages dropping in like fate itself had a schedule. They shoved in a chaotic mix of fruits, monster meat, and more, everything you could possibly think of. Even the game's light sources are crystals, shining bright like they're worth fighting for. And every time he tried to find his way, the place just swallowed him deeper and deeper. And he couldn't stop wondering, could he actually get these items from somewhere else? But then he had a theory. Maybe this game was built for the rich, so the prized loot didn't drop randomly, it got dangled out like tribute for the players. Maybe they'd accidentally picked him as a test player. One night, his mom cooked up a sizzling stir-fry with the meat they'd just received. While they were locked in at the dinner table, she leaned in and asked if he could grab more of those fruits because she felt lighter and way healthier after eating them, and he promised he'd go straight to the villagers to find out what was going on. She even let slip that Seikka had a sweet tooth for the meat, too. Then his dad jumped in, raving that the meat was insanely delicious, way more natural than the stuff they usually grab from the store, and he said the texture and flavor just screamed real, top-tier quality. Hearing his dad ramble on about it so excitedly totally reassured Yashio, because it was rare for his old man to talk about anything with that much fire. Next day, he tore into the garden, yanking a saw through the wood like he meant business. His father stood there, watching him wrestle and struggle every second, struggling like crazy to make it through. His dad stepped in and offered to show him how it properly. He had a strong feeling his dad was secretly helping him, and it was driving him to believe he didn't want. His neighbors caught him in the middle of it, so they dropped everything to look, and embarrassment hit hard. After his father took the saw back and told him to try again, he kicked into gear, starting to hand him advice every single day. And last weekend, they even teamed up to use the logs to fix the garden fence. Then he started plotting how to teach the villagers to cook meat. His mom had drilled him on cooking for ages, so he'd already gotten pretty good. Even lunch with the villagers had turned into something he did without thinking anymore. That evening he was digging through the fridge when, bam, his sister burst through the door like she'd been gone forever. With shaky nerves, he finally greeted her, and she practically froze when his voice came out. She said she was just thrilled to be back. Later, curled up in his room, he replayed it all in his head. Somehow he'd finally been able to talk to his family again, and it was all because of the village of fate. He started wondering, was he truly helping the villagers, or were they silently using him right back? Meanwhile, Gams threw up a fence around the cave, sealing it up tight to keep everyone safe. After they finished putting up the fence, Kem leaned in to ask her brother one terrifying question. Could monsters jump right over it? He leaned in and told her, don't worry. Then he added, if any break through, me and Mullies will take them down. He said the only true problem was the swarm of enemies again, so there was zero reason to panic about it. Then he urged them to go inside. Yashio figured their defense looked stronger now, but then he felt it, something was off. They all stood tighter than before, like the situation had gotten better on paper, not in their nerves. They tried to look calm, but the restlessness was screaming through every twitch. When they stared at that wooden calendar, they realized it wasn't just time. It showed what everyone was up to on their side. On the very last day of the month, he couldn't shake the feeling something huge was about to go down. Everyone was crammed around the dinner table, tearing into food like nothing else mattered. Carol blurted out, why is everyone acting so gloomy? And Rhodey's assured her, Mama and Baba are doing great, always sweet with each other. But Carol just noticed that. They checked the calendar and instantly picked a side. Rhodey's admitted they didn't want her worrying, then asked, do you remember how we always told you to stay inside on the last day of the month and go to bed early? She nodded, saying she remembered because the adults wore terrifying faces and got furious fast that night. She blurted out her thoughts. If gods are everywhere, why do we only get 7? And why do we only count 12 months in a year? Where are the 5 missing gods? Rhodus grinned, impressed by how sharp she was, because it turns out the 7 gods once ruled the 7 days, each one standing for light, the moon, fire, water, nature, lightning, and earth. Yashio finally clocked it. This whole world ran on the same kind of Monday to Sunday setup, tied straight to those same elements. Now it all clicked. He finally understood their god system, and he realized he wasn't just watching. He was one of those gods who served under one of the 7. That truth snapped everything into place, and then he learned the real reason. The gods were at war, and their fighting exploded into a massive battle. For the first 31 days, this battle was brutal. Freezing winds tore at everything. Then on day 120, the god of nature finally stepped out and crushed everyone as the strongest. By day 182, the gods of water and lightning clashed in a ferocious fight, slamming into each other and driving straight into each. Then on the 243rd day, the god of fire snapped, exploding with rage. 365 long days passed before the gods finally stopped tearing each other apart. After that brutal war finally ended, the gods who once spilled into this world then carved the 7-day week into reality and the span when their power burned brightest. That's what people call the 7 chief gods. She demanded to know what became of the gods who failed. And Rhodus leaned in and explained that the defeated gods were treated as evil, got ripped out of the world and thrown into the crushing depths of the earth. Every month on the last day, they surged back to life, piling up power and unleashing it into monsters, right during evil god's temptation. Kem warned everyone that this was the reason the final day was pure danger, because the monsters' powers kept swelling, and in an instant they turned wicked. Yashio finally got it, why a big cross sat on the last day of the month. He counted it out, 10 days left until that marked day, just like it worked in the real world. It was November 20, and in the game it matched, same date, and only 10 days left before the month slammed shut. He stared at his fate points, and couldn't stop wondering what kind of destiny they could still unlock. There's no way he could have kept those villagers safe. Midnight had already slammed into place, and he spotted Rhodey sitting alone at the table, just staring into his own world. Layla burst in and demanded to know what was wrong with him. He confessed that the evil god's temptation wouldn't leave his mind for a second. He pointed to that same attack from before, and you could hear the fear underneath as it admitted it was terrified of losing its family. Seeing Rhodius tremble like that, Yashio couldn't stop asking what in the world went down during the last evil god's temptation. 3 weeks ago, Carol was crashed out in bed when, boom, she jolted awake out of nowhere. Bolted forward, racing to find her mom and dad. They were in the kitchen cooking up a storm when her mom leaned in and asked to splash cold water on her face. She marched up to the well, splashed cold water on her face, and felt that fresh chill hit instantly. She showed up without a towel, and then Carol just nodded as someone popped in and asked if she'd woken up. And when she asked where their big brother was, Kemp said he'd been posted at the village gates, keeping watch. Carol bolted for freedom and snapped, "If Big Brother isn't here, I don't care." Kem hated it, but the moment she spotted Carol sprinting, she lunged to stop her. Carol dashed back home and demanded to know if anyone had heard Kem's voice. Kem told her, "I don't know," then dove straight into her breakfast. After she finished her meal, Carol bolted out the door. Her mom demanded where she was headed, and Carol snapped back that she was going to find her big brother. Then her mom tried to block her, but Carol sprinted off without a second thought. She pushed through the bustling market and flashed warm hellos at everyone she passed. Someone asked if Rhodey's and Layla were home, and she snapped back an answer, then bolted before they could even catch up. Suddenly, she slammed into a towering wall, and then he finally spotted the Gams nearby. She sprinted right up to him and wrapped her arms around him so tight it felt like she'd never let go. Gams warned her she shouldn't be out there that day, and when she asked what the big deal was, he spilled the reason. It was a totally special day, and when he looked around, he realized there wasn't a single other kid in sight. She nodded and asked him straight up, "So, did you build that massive wall?" He shook his head and said, "Long ago, decades back, there was a massive war, and this place was the fortress they held the line from. After the war, refugees poured into that town, they rebuilt their lives there, and somehow they started to thrive." She asked if those walls could actually shield them from enemies, and Gams nodded right along. Right when her mom finally showed up, she snapped, told her to stop sprinting, and begged her to calm down. A soldier strode up to Gams and demanded to know if he had them in his sights. Gams snapped back that they were their neighbors, always kind to him and his sister, and the soldier under him could barely believe it because the kids didn't even look scared in the slightest. The game folks say ever since this town was founded, there's been one unshakable truth: these walls were never, ever broken. Layla snapped a quick apology for her daughter's interruption, then promised she'd give her a proper scolding later. But Gams pushed her to pull back just a little, then they dropped it and moved on. As soon as Carol got home, she leaned in and asked, "Wait, what's so special about today?" "Like a festival." Layla said it'd be even better if this had been the festival, but hey, at least they'd get a proper feast tomorrow. Carol let out a breath of relief, and right after that, Rhodey's and Layla shot each other worried looks. Rhodey's stared out the window and swore he'd loaded every last thing into the wagon, just in case. Layla nodded, scribbled the extra note, and crossed her fingers so hard that nothing would actually happen, praying they de-slide through the day with zero problems. Outside, the monsters were everywhere, way more than normal, and this time, the whole mix of different types banded together into one unstoppable group. They all surged forward together, attacking in one unstoppable wave. Gams clenched his support, and yeah, it's worth fighting back. He hurled spears and loosed arrows, blasting the monsters down in a relentless fight. One of Gam's subordinates barked, "Everyone, follow Gam, don't let those monsters cross into the town." Then, out of nowhere, a monster crashed over the wall and tore into a soldier, and the whole place froze in shock. Then, right after that, wave after wave of monsters started leaping over the wall and crashing into the city. Chaos exploded across the village, and even their home started falling apart from the inside. Rhodey's Layla and Carol huddled together, shaking with fear, clinging to each other with white-knuckle intensity as everything spiraled straight out of control. Right out of nowhere, Gams and his sister burst into their home, demanding to know if everyone was okay. They checked in and said they were okay, and Gams told them, "Don't freak out." Both him and his sister were splattered in blood, his from battling monsters, hers from rushing in to heal the injured. Rhodey's leaned in and asked how the fight was going. Then Gams finally admitted it was getting worse by the second, like hope had already vanished. He broke the news. Those gates are smashed open, and a whole swarm of monsters is pouring into town. He figured the safest move was to shove his family and his sister out of harm's way. Gams screamed at them to run for their lives and leave Rhodus behind to rot. A messenger practically yanked him into the news, telling him the wagon was ready and packed with boxes of supplies. Gams stood guard as they all piled into the wagon, and the moment it lurched forward, their ride to safety began. Monsters with beards showed up, and Gams snapped at Rhodey's to get back on the wagon, right now. Swiftly and hop on the wagon, feel it tear forward as it speeds off. Gams broke the news that the town's northwestern wall had crumbled, right where the gap was starting to spread chaos. So there might be a way out right through there, if they can pull it off. Rhodus' heart dropped when he saw the whole town blazing in flames, fire and destruction everywhere he looked. Tears burned down his cheeks as he stared at. A once beautiful town now lies in ruins, like its glory got erased overnight. After they busted out of the town, Carol turned to her mother and demanded answers. "Mom, are we?" Would she finally make it back home, only for her mother to crush her hopes with, "You probably will." But he promised her that brand new adventures were waiting for them somewhere else. Kem grinned and declared she knew they'd made it only because divine protection had their backs, adding that the god of fate was steering their every move. Later that day, a courier slammed up to Yashio's house and shoved a tiny parcel into his hands. Right now, Rhodey's is grinding nonstop, pushing his fighting skills to the limit, with Gams drilling him nonstop. Sometime after, Gams leaned in and told Rhodey straight up that he wasn't built for battle, and Mullies told him to step back from the front line and let him handle the fighting. Rhodey's finally confessed, "Yeah, I thought more power would solve everything," but the truth hit him hard. He had no clue where his limits were. He hurriedly apologized to Gams for wasting his time, and Yashio just watched because Gams didn't mess around. He was strict to the bone. After dinner, Layla leaned in and said they were running out of fruit. Then she grilled Gams about whether he could grab some during his patrols and bring it back. Carol shot her hand up, begging to join him and help too, and Rhodey's blinked in surprise, because she admitted she hadn't been able to step outside since they moved into that cave. Rhodey's grabbed her attention and reminded her, once again, that as the special day crept closer, monsters got meaner and the outside world turned way too dangerous to survive. But Carol grinned and promised she'd be okay with her big brother, then added she'd go gather tons of sweet, delicious fruit. Yet the moment her father heard it, rage flashed in his eyes as he slammed the table and chewed her out. He told her to lock in and listen to what he was seeing with his own eyes. Everyone froze in shock at how he reacted, and Harold's eyes brimmed with tears, like they were about to spill over any second. Carol bolted from the table, sobbing and screaming that she hated him, then slammed herself into a room and locked the door. Yashio watched Rhodey's every move and felt his own helplessness crush him, because deep down, he knew the best he could do was lean on prophecy and give the villagers a spark of hope. But he knew that wouldn't fix a thing. Only 214 fate points left, so summoning a crew of hunters through a miracle was the move he had to consider. Still, it felt dangerously unpredictable, because you had no clue what kind of personalities those hunters would have. He figured summoning a golem was his best bet. He could control it perfectly and keep it from ever hurting the villagers. Yashio had to hit 700 points and the clock was brutal, only 10 days left, so he flashed an idea about borrowing money, but then, too ashamed to even open his mouth and ask his father or sister for help. He even wondered if he could pawn off the tributes he'd collected from the villagers, but he knew getting rid of them and cashing out fast like that wouldn't be easy. Yashio was pacing in panic, racking his brain over what to do and the thought of. The moment I woke up, the thought of our time job came crashing into his mind. It looked like the easiest fix, until reality hit. He'd never worked a day in his life. He remembered that one time he tried a job interview, then pride hijacked everything, only chasing high-paying gigs at good perks, and even when he swung for a spot, he still couldn't land a single position. His father even pulled strings through his connections to try and help him. But Yashio ended up dragging shame right onto his family. 10 years passed, and he still hadn't clocked a single day of work. Sometimes Yashio dreams about getting a real job, but fear yanks him back. He hates the thought of trying his hardest only to get rejected. And somehow, even now, that fear still won't let him move. He couldn't stand the thought of letting anyone down ever again. As those thoughts crashed down on him, heavy and unstoppable. Then it hit him. This was the moment everything had to change. If he didn't make a move right now, he feared he'd be stuck like this for the rest of his life. So he started asking himself if there was any job out there that would actually put money in his pocket by the end of the month. Something that could help them scrape together enough cash to keep the villagers alive and taken care of. But landing short-term gigs in his town was brutal, and the fact that he didn't have a driver's license made everything 10 times worse. He started spinning through possibilities, then hit a wall of obstacles that crushed any hope of a quick fix. Rhodey's reached out to comfort Carol, but she shut him down and refused to say a word. Layla slid in, soft as ever, and told him to give her some breathing room for now. As Yashio watched them fight, the crush of their emotions hit him like a tidal wave. He snapped into action, yanked on his jacket, and decided he needed a job magazine, because he refused to keep relying on the internet. He snatched his bicycle and tore off down the road to grab a magazine packed with job listings. Miyoshio darted back home, and the second his mother saw him stepping up on his own, her face lit up with pure joy. She greeted him like sunshine on a hard day, beaming that he finally stepped out. Yashio sprinted to his room, practically vibrating with excitement to scan the magazine for job openings. Then he flipped a page and his mother's voice cut through the house. "Dinner's ready." He headed downstairs and slid right into the family dinner at the table. Yashio clocked it. His sister had come back too, and she looked shocked, blurting out, "Weren't you supposed to be gone by now?" But he grinned and swept her in with a warm welcome. She seemed a little. Still, he looked totally thrown off by how suddenly friendly everyone was when they finally all sat down to eat. Their mother suddenly dropped the news that Yashio was thinking about getting a job. Sayuki forced a shaky smile as their father fired off a comment, like, "So you finally got some drive." Yashio quickly insisted it was only a part-time gig, nothing big, just enough cash to make ends meet, and their father shot back. "Honestly, I don't care why. You're fired up now, and that's what matters." Yashio blinked in shock because he'd braced himself for his father to demand he work full-time and nothing else. Sayuki teased him about how he'd changed lately, then shot him a grin and asked if her big brother had finally gotten a girlfriend. So their mom burst out laughing and joked that Yashio didn't exactly look popular, and Yashio just stared like, "Wait, why are you speaking for me?" Then he realized Sayuki had called him big brother, and that made his heart light up. Then his father leaned in and asked whether Yashio's job choice had anything to do with the village, shocking Yashio with how quick and sharp he was. Yashio finally admitted the truth. He couldn't stand the idea of taking from the village and never giving anything back. Sayuki stared around, completely lost. Because everyone else was locked into the conversation, she was the only one not keeping up. Their mom snapped that it was bad manners to chatter with food in their mouths, demanded they finish first, and Sayuki nodded along, then begged, "Okay, explain everything once we're done." After dinner, Yashio was posted in the garden when his father marched over and grilled him about whether he'd landed a job yet. Yashio shot back that he'd already found 3 options and would call them the very next day. Yashio's father leaned in and asked if he needed short-term work. Yashio nodded fast, saying he'd been handling something important until the end of the month, so he could only take a job for a limited time. When his dad asked if there were any specific requirements, Yashio swallowed hard and admitted he was terrible at customer service, so he was already eyeing jobs that meant pure physical labor. Then his father leaned in and offered to call a friend for help, swearing that no matter how old Yashio got, he'd always be his father. There's zero shame in leaning on family, and when Yashio heard that, memories crashed back, like when his father tried to help him in the past, and Yashio shut it all down. Then his father leaned in and told him, "If you want to pull off something big, grab every bit of support you can, yes, even from your own family." That advice sent Yashio straight back to Veroda's, who tried to help Carol only for her to shove him away, the exact same thing Yashio had done once before. After he kept replaying it in his head, Yashio nodded along and took his father's advice to heart. His father snapped, calling his friend right away to set up something for Yashio. Then he told Yashio to ditch the stiff stuff and switch into something way more flexible. Yashio blurted that he had a track suit, and his father shot back, "Get ready, be back in 30 minutes." Yashio's stomach dropped because he hadn't even written his resume yet, but his father calmly reassured him. No rush, his friend would handle things. Yashio bolted straight to his room. He tore through his old clothes, stripped them off, and shoved on brand new outfits. While his heart hammered, terrified he'd disappoint his father all over again. Right before he left, he snapped back to his computer to see what was blowing up in the village. He clocked Rhodes's frustration and quickly asked Layla if she needed help with anything. Layla paused for a beat, then said, "Carol already handled it all. She told me that ever since they moved into the cave, Carol had been grabbing the reins, jumping in to help without being asked, and showing just how far she'd grown." Rhodes then sprinted to Carola and apologized for snapping and getting angry. Carol grinned at him and said everybody knew just how deeply he'd cherished her. And yeah, his anger only flared because he wanted to shield her. Then Carol's words hit, and Rhodes was stunned by how mature and understanding she'd grown. She told him flat out that she wasn't asking to go outside ever again. Rhodes snapped back and admitted he was the one who messed up, saying his fear of the evil god's temptation had shoved the truth out of his head, that they were already in a new land, ringed by their friends, like a wave of familiar faces closing in. And when he realized they'd chosen to share their lives, he knew they couldn't keep hiding in fear, shutting themselves off from the world. Yashio couldn't believe it. Rhodes had flipped his whole perspective. Rhodes beamed and announced that Carol was officially a valuable part of the village. Now she could make her own choices. He said he trusted her with everything, and the room lit up with joy, while Yashio stood on the outside, watching. He flashed a smile and pressed his hands to his face, like he'd finally exhaled for the first time. He silently thanked the game for planting the courage to change things for the better, and pure joy surged through him as he stepped out, laughing with pure joy as he saw every last villager smiling. Next, Yashio slid into his dad's car and watched the streets blur as they headed to meet his father's friend, and he couldn't hold back. "What kind of job is it?" His dad answered, "Just cleaning duty at a supermarket." Then he sighed, explaining the night shift was short-staffed because one of the part-timers had quit. Hearing that, Yashio couldn't shake the thought. Maybe this job was exactly what he'd been looking for. At last, they burst through and reached their destination, and the journey was finally over. And then his dad's friend spotted them and came running over from the distance. He greeted them like old friends, then praised Yosho straight to his face, shocked that someone who'd been cooped up indoors for so long still had a body that looked this fit. Yashio's dad finally squeezed out a goodbye, praying they'd actually get along. Then he walked off, and watching him disappear, Yashio jolted inside, like a kid who can't stand how fast his dad leaves. Yashio stormed into the supermarket, and his dad's friend snapped him out of his nerves, telling him all he had to do was stick to the instructions, mess up or get stuck, and he or two other employees would help him figure it out. His dad's friend brought him around to the crew, then joked, "Go easy on him," like he was protecting him from getting grilled. The girl lit up and greeted him warmly, saying it was great to meet him, while the boy pointed at Yashio's height and teased that it'd make cleaning the fluorescent lamps way easier than it was for him. Yashio clocked just how effortlessly confident they both looked, nothing like him at all. He reminded himself he was fresh in this, so he swallowed his pride and went all out. He tilted his head and said, "I'm hoping we can all get along from here." After his shift wrapped up, Yashio hovered by his dad's friend, the supermarket manager, who leaned in and asked if he could start at the same time tomorrow, and Yashio shot back that there was absolutely no problem. The manager flat out said it'd be another brutal late-night shift, then promised he'd pick Yashio up at 8 p.m. When Yashio finally geared up to leave, his coworker called out, "It was really nice meeting you, and I can't wait to team up with you again tomorrow." As they headed out, Yashio smirked and watched them fade into the distance. Feeling a little more at ease, Yashio headed home, replaying the whole job in his head. The seed he planted, the vacuuming, the shuffle of everything back in place, and the tools scrubbed clean. And when he finally realized his nerves were calmed and his work was done, satisfaction hit him hard. It had been ages since his body moved like that, and damn, it felt amazing. When he cracked the door open, he figured everyone would be dead asleep. He sprinted toward a bath like he couldn't wait, but thirst hit him first. Then, when he stepped into the kitchen, he spotted a meal laid out on the table with a note. "No way, awesome job. Are you starving already?" "Go on, dig in." He grinned and it hit him. This was a message his mom left for him. Grinning with relief, he dug into the meal, then finally sank into quiet after a brutal day. It hit even sweeter. Then once he finished, he bolted straight to the bathroom and saw the steaming water was already waiting, the tub spotless and ready for him. He grinned again because he knew Mom's love reached for him once more. As he sank into the warm tub, he silently mouthed his thanks to her. A smile burst across Yashio's face, and after his bath he reached to check. He cranked up the computer and froze when he saw every single villager already passed out in sleep. He broke into a smile, convinced that they were the reason he could drag himself through the whole day. Seeing them grind non-stop lit a fire under him and pushed him forward. Exhaustion hit him hard, and he knew it was time to shut his eyes and finally get some sleep. When he snapped awake, his whole body screamed with aching soreness in his muscles. He sprinted downstairs, and there was his mom right in front of him like she'd been waiting. He greeted him with open warmth and offered to fire up lunch for him. As they slid into their seats at the table, she leaned in and fired, asking how his day at work really went. While he was eating, Yashio leaned in and told them everyone had been kind to him, and he still had to clock in on the very same shift tonight. She lit up when she saw him trying, then asked how he liked last night's dinner. Yashio grinned and said it was delicious, thanking her for looking after him so well. After he shoved the last bite down and headed off, his mom shouted, "Hey, another parcel came for you." Curious, he yanked it open, and there it was, a nasty little ball of dirt waiting inside. He instantly clocked it. It had to be Carol S. The villagers swore they could only ship him one tribute a day, but that was a lie. Up to 2 were allowed. But Carol kept cheating the rules, sending stuff the moment her mood hit. Sometimes she scooped up river stones, and other times she picked shiny dirt balls from the ground like they were treasure. They called it Dorodango. Then, out of nowhere, she started carving blocks of wood and mailing them out non-stop. Yashio couldn't wait to see what she'd turn into because each steady session was sharpening her skills, day after day. He leaned in, hungry to watch her work grow. Then he glanced at his computer screen, and there was Carol carving something right before his eyes. She blurted, "I'm done," and he beamed, thrilled to see just how much fun she was having, and realized she de-cooked up something brand new again. Carol practically bounced over to Mully's, showing him what she'd made and daring him to guess what it was. Mully's stared at it for a beat, then shot back, asking if it was the god of fate. Carol lit up with a grin and told him, "You're right." Yashio gently tucked the dirt ball into his locker, the same one where he kept every item Carol had sent him. He knew everyone else would shrug them off as useless, but to him and Carol, these little things were pure treasure. He couldn't shake the question. Did the game company's own employees craft these handmade treasures, or did Carol herself stitch them up out in the game world? Still, some stubborn part of him refused to let go of one wild hope, that Carol really did send them, even if everyone else thought it sounded ridiculous. Sinking into a wave of sleepiness, Yashio stumbled to his bed, craving a little more rest to numb the ache in his muscles. And as he finally lay down and shut his eyes, his thoughts drifted off into the dark. He never expected his mom to beam like that just because he was working, and for the first time, gratitude hit him hard. He was earning money, doing something that actually helped other people, and it felt good. Finally, he let his shoulders drop and relaxed, praying that a little more rest would help him heal. After he finally caught his breath, Yashio geared up and headed back to work. Right as he started vacuuming, the manager leaned in, asked if he'd got the hang of it yet, and reminded him to not stress so hard. "You can't possibly get fully adjusted in just 2 days." The manager leaned in and reassured him, saying, "My staff are solid people." And then he called out that supposedly pretentious male coworker, because that guy looked fancy, but he worked like a machine. Yashio clocked it instantly. No matter what that guy was like, he still moved like a machine, quick and razor efficient. The manager beamed and leaned in to tell Yashio that diligence was everything. Then he praised him to the sky, calling him an outstanding worker. Yashio thanked him, and the male coworker, grinning, snapped at the manager to stop clowning with the new guy and get back to work. The girl chimed in with a grin, saying, "If you're gonna slack, then pay them more and cut your own salary." The manager burst into laughter, bragging that he controlled the wages, then sauntered away like he owned the place. Everyone cracked up laughing, and Yashio felt pure momentum in his chest. This place was his first job, and the vibe was so welcoming and fun that he couldn't stop smiling. After punching out of his night shift, Yashio raised his hand and waved goodbye as his coworkers streamed out. The manager even praised everyone for their hard work, and as Yashio headed home, he couldn't stop thinking. One more week before the evil god's temptation hit, and he knew he had to keep his spirits up for the villagers. He burst through the door, flopped into his chair, and grinned at his computer, because he hadn't checked the game in forever, so he decided to hunt down the day's conversation log. He stumbled on a heated conversation between Gams, Carol, and Chim. Gams felt totally drained, So Kemp grabbed his attention and told him to take a break. Meanwhile, Carol pulled him close and insisted he sleep with her, because he desperately needed that nap. Chum finally blurted out, "I'm talking to my big brother, not your entertainment," and the whole moment just fizzled with nothing exciting in it. Yashio stepped right into a tense chat between Rhodey's and Layla. He found out Rhodey's was messing with antidote mixtures, learning from Mully's, and he rushed to tell Layla he couldn't promise what would happen yet. But if he couldn't storm the front lines, he'd still find a way, any way, to throw his support behind the fight. Seeing that, Layla lunged in from behind, wrapped her arms around him, and told him he was the most super reliable man alive. Yashio grinned watching them live every day with pure optimism. Then, out of nowhere, he spotted another conversation log. No names were dropped, but the whole conversation was clearly circling. Ordinary refugees who still face brutal dangers every single day. They argued whether to act right now, because if they didn't, those refugees would get snared and perish under the evil god's temptation. Plus, they reminded everyone that this place used to be home to humans, until they were wiped out. Then one person blurted out the only thing that mattered. Maybe they weren't just safe. Maybe they were being favored by the god of fate. He told him to hold still, do nothing, and watch everything unfold. But as the refugees poured into their holy land, they were hunting for the perfect moment to strike. They were about to deliver nature's judgment, and when Yashio read that conversation, his world went still, because he realized Mullis was a spy on the move, always watching, always hunting for the next secret. He couldn't believe it when he realized Mullis wasn't just around. She was a full-on spy. That's when it hit him. This whole guest treatment was really the reason he'd never been treated like an ally. From their talk, he found out Mullis was born to a forest tribe, and rage simmered in him because the villagers had moved in and ruined his home. Now the villagers could finally breathe easy. Malice knew they were protected, because he understood the god of fate had blessed them. That thought eased Yashio's heart a bit, because in his mind, Mullis had already saved them just by showing up. He glanced at the clock, saw he was already running behind, and decided right then and there to drop his prophecy on them the very next day, teasing the real identity of Mullis like a secret about to explode. With that settled, he crawled into bed and nodded off fast, drifting into sleep. The very next day, over a loud breakfast table, they were finally sitting down to eat. Yashio dropped a prophecy in their laps. He swallowed his pride and apologized for piling on more pressure, because they were already terrified of the evil god's temptation. He even sent them a quiet warning, and it was clear as day that anyone who dared threaten, the peace would get slammed by the god of faith's judgment. Right after he wrapped it up, he clocked that Mullis looked totally startled. Kem shot him a worried look and asked if he was okay, then Malice nodded and confirmed, "Yeah, I'm fine." Yashio noticed Mullah was terrified of the god of fate, and then Gam stepped in, saying if they leaned on the god's help, they might somehow make it through, so they'd better go all out. Yashio then figured he might have finally stopped Mullis from butting in when he wasn't needed. For now, he stared at his 350 fate points and prayed his job could finally scrape together enough cash to buy more and gamble everything on getting his golem. He was buzzing with excitement, already picturing how he'd use the golem with Gams. After that, he stormed into work and met up with his manager. When he finally arrived, he found Yamamoto, the boy co-worker, missing. He demanded to know what was up, and the female co-worker told him straight that he wasn't feeling well and was staying home for the day. The manager beamed at them and said, "You three are teaming up in a smaller shop than usual," like it'd all be over before they even had time to worry. After they wrapped up the job, the manager leaned in and told Yashio, "You're a lifesaver, thanks for coming with us." Yashio couldn't stop smiling from the news, so when he finally burst through the door at home, his dad was right there. Dad was halfway through dinner when he finally walked in, and Mom lit up and welcomed him back, saying that if he'd shown up around this time, they could have waited and eaten together. He told her it was totally fine, then bragged that they knocked out their work early today and somehow slid back in fast. His mom looked at him and basically said, "You're starving, go heat up something for yourself." He clocked that she was in an insanely good mood, so he couldn't stop wondering, should he finally ask his dad about it? But confidence crashed in his chest. He froze, couldn't move. Then, right when he finally pulled himself together to talk to his dad, his mom dropped the bombshell. The food was finally ready to hit the table. He sensed this wild energy rolling off her and snapped, "Mom, what happened?" She broke into a smile like she had a secret ready to spill. Then his dad cut her off mid-sentence. Yashio leaned in to catch her favorite TV series starting, only to see his dad slam the brakes, cutting her off mid-sentence. leaving Yashio totally baffled. After dinner, he bolted upstairs to his room and replayed the compliment his boss had tossed his way, and it lit a little fire in his chest that felt way too intense. Even with sleep tugging at his eyes, he pushed it aside and went to check on the villagers first. He glanced over and saw Carol already drifted off, while Rhodys and Layla quietly started getting ready for sleep. After they'd finally had some time together, he stepped back and gave them the privacy they deserved. He stared at Mullies sprawled on his bed, lost in deep, relentless thought. Yashio figured Mullies could vanish any time, but the moment it hit him, he realized the villagers would get crushed too, because everyone was leaning on him. He knew he couldn't shove Mullies out, so he just locked in, watching every move like a hawk. Drowsiness crashed over him, and he decided it was time to hit the bed. Suddenly his eyes snapped to it. This real kanji was boxed in by a square. Right as Yashio was about to drift off to sleep, a real dialogue box suddenly popped up on his screen, straight out of the same nightmare that showed up in Gam's dream. Curiosity hit him hard, so he slipped in a quick peek before he finally went to bed. The moment he hit the button, the screen snapped to life, showing a sleek modern house right there. He zoomed in and tore through every corner: entrance, hall, bathroom, and kitchen. Then, total shock, he realized it was his own house, looming from every single angle. Stunned and confused, he stared at the screen, freaking out about how he even managed to crawl his way back to the original game. Right then, he spotted someone in the bathroom, and when he leaned in, his eyes locked on Sayuki. You could even spot those little dialogue boxes as she talked to herself while she washed the dishes. Panic hit like a thunderclap. If this was real and his sister ever found out he'd been spying on her, it was over. She was convinced she'd kill him, like this had to be a nightmare, and he just reassured himself it was all in his head. Convinced he'd dozed off mid-game. Yashio finally spotted his mom and dad sprawled on the couch in the living room, and curiosity hit hard. He leaned in to listen to their talk, telling himself it was just a dream, so it couldn't possibly hurt. As he tuned in, he heard his mom pepper his dad with one sharp question. Why did he slam the brakes on her mentioning the wedding anniversary gift, the one he'd given her for the very first time in 10 years? Yashio's stomach dropped, because that's exactly why his mom had been glowing. Seeing his parents finally get along felt great, but as their kid, he couldn't shake that awkward, tight feeling. Then he heard his dad say he was happy she loved the gift, but the truth hit him. Those last 10 years felt like a wall between them. His mom leaned in and asked, "Is this all because of Yashio?" His dad finally caved and agreed. Yashio's jaw dropped when he heard it, even though he knew it was all just a dream. Those words hit like a dagger in his chest. He remembered how calm his dad used to be before he turned into a NEET, and how his dad always gave everything he had in every single thing. Whenever Yashio got stuck on something in school, his dad would pull him close and patiently break it down in the simplest way possible until it finally clicked. And every time his mom snapped at him and tears spilled, his dad would slip in quietly, grin in the shadows, and hand him ice cream like it was a secret cure. Hearing it all hit Yashio like a truck, and suddenly he couldn't ignore how much everything had shifted, because the weight of it crushed him. Looking back on his past, Yashio finally admitted the truth. He'd never really owned up to his mistakes. Instead, he shoved those memories down deep, blamed everyone else, and let himself keep going, like he had no choice. Tears flooded his eyes, and right then he caught his mom whispering that Yashio looked way brighter ever since he started working. So we were good on that, because he finally admitted he'd been dying to apologize for all the cruel things he'd said. About Yashio either not pushing hard enough, or missing the mark when it came to landing a job. His mom burst into laughter, remembering how Yashio's dad used to show up hours late back when he was the king of party nights in university. The dog couldn't even hide it. He admitted he'd been worse than Yashio back in the days dragged on, and he could barely squeeze through his classes. He admitted he had zero right to trash Yashio, and the guilt crushed him from the inside. When Yashio locked eyes with his dad in that moment, it felt like the floor dropped out from under him. He caught the real disappointment burning in his dad's eyes, but he knew deep down this wasn't his dad's fault. To Yashio, his dad was still nothing short of a legend. Someone he'd admired like a dream he never stopped chasing. Yashio watched his mom and dad share a tender, tearful conversation, and tears burst free and poured down his face. He heard them insist that, just like Yashio, they too had to change starting right now. Through tear-streaked cheeks, he wiped his tears away and flashed a brave smile. He figured it was just a dream, but seeing his parents felt so real, like they weren't strangers at all, but pieces of him wrapped in love, already standing tall and acting like the best parents he could ever imagine. As the truth hit him, the weight in his chest finally eased, because he realized they'd all been hauling the same heavy worries they couldn't even name, and now everyone felt just a bit lighter. Yashio jolted awake at his keyboard, staring at it like he'd been frozen mid-dream. He grinned, convinced that even if it was only a dream, it somehow still hit like something real. Even though the dream felt tailor-made for him, he didn't care. He just absorbed it because it lit a new kind of courage in him, the kind that made it finally feel possible to tell his parents the truth, like he'd been meant to all along. He bolted to the kitchen and froze. His whole family was already tucking into breakfast, smiling like nothing was wrong. With a grin, he fired off a bright good morning, and his sister stared at him, totally thrown off by what she just heard. On November 30th, Yashio was sprinting down the street like he was chasing something that would change his life. Panting hard and terrified, he couldn't even figure out how he'd wound up in this mess. During the evil god's gut-wrenching temptation. 2 days earlier, back in November. On the 28th, he'd been glued to his screen, watching the villagers as they steadily forged himself for the evil god's next temptation. They tore it down and rebuilt the fence brick by brick, sealed every steady gap, and even raised a watchtower so no one could slip past unnoticed. Yashio spotted Mullies up in the watchtower, eyes locked on a monster creeping nearby, and nailed it from close range, dropping the target clean with his bow. Mullies' archery was terrifyingly good, and when Rhodey's, still grinding on the defenses, finally saw what he could do, he thanked him right away for the help. Yashio couldn't stop worrying. Was Mullies really still planning to stay in the village while the evil god tried to lure everyone in? Or if he'd vanish for good? Realizing this was his very first time, it all hit him like a full-on tutorial. Every moment felt like it was teaching him the ropes. He felt thrilled watching the villagers grind through their defenses, training them, testing them, toughening them up. But the pressure closing in around him still wouldn't let up. If he even flinched once, no matter how rare that chance, he'd watch his fire die out and slide right back into his old, lifeless mindset. Yashio refused to let that happen. He knew he couldn't afford to lose With 548 points under his belt, he felt unstoppable and certain his life was finally surging forward. With his part-time wages rolling in every day, he'd soon have enough power to summon a golem. After sinking hours into tons of games, Yashio felt solid. He trusted he could muscle through whatever challenge hit next, even if the controls turned nasty. Meanwhile, Gams was busy checking out the weapons when Carol slid up and asked him if, "Don't worry, on the day the evil god throws his temptation at them, you'll be safe." He leaned in and told her they'd already bolstered the defenses, so even if monsters crawl out, they won't get past. Relief flooded Carol's chest as she hugged him. Then Kem stormed in, snapping at Carol that Gams was her big brother. Carol burst into laughter and teased her, warning that her stepsister was downright terrifying. Shaking off the joke, Kem flipped into full seriousness and pressed Gams hard. "Tell me, can we really survive what's coming with what we've got right now?" The air turned ice cold when Rhodey's brought up what happened to their last village, and everyone went dead silent, choking on the weight of that memory. Shattering the quiet, Mullies snapped into the conversation and warned them, "Don't you dare forget the Forbidden Forest. It's packed with monsters from every corner of the wild, each one lurking like it owns the place." He admitted he always dodged the evil god's temptation because it was way too dangerous, then apologized for not saying so sooner. Kem just grinned and told him it was fine since Mollis had already lent them a ton of help and strength. Mullies had been a huge help to the village, and Yashio, watching everything play out, nodded along. Because to him, Mullies was the real deal. A dependable doctor, and even without knowing him well, Yashio could feel it in his bones that he was a good man. Gams snapped out the truth. If they even tried to run, the wagon's wheels were about to shatter, and none of them knew how to fix it, so leaving the village was off the table. Mullies said it didn't matter whether he and Gams tried to bust out alone or join forces. Escape was still on the table. But once everyone else was there too, backing out wasn't even an option. When Gems heard that, sadness hit hard, but he snapped right back. He roared that they'd have to fight to protect their home, and this was their only shot to live. Then he swore, with everything he had, that he'd make sure every single one of them made it through together. When everyone heard the grit in Gam's voice, they broke into smiles. Yashio felt relief wash over him, and pride surged just as strong. Gams then thanked Mullies for everything and told him she didn't want him dragged into it, not one bit, against his own will. Everyone tied off their hands, thanking Mullies in a rush, though he looked utterly stunned. Yashio realized everyone in the village could feel it. Malice was about to vanish for good. Malice told them to lift their heads. "I'm trying to help, I swear," he said, and then he hit them with the truth. He had a family and someone was waiting for him. He decided he'd leave that night. He told them he'd whip up a batch of herbs, ready to use the moment they needed them. Carol shot him a question, was he really about to leave? And he started to appa. Then she demanded he come back and play with her. Hearing that, his smile lit up instantly and he swore he'd be back. Yashiho couldn't stop wondering what kind of person Malas truly was, because honestly, he didn't feel like a villain at all. Even while he watched the villagers, Yashio never meant them any harm. He just grinned, already lost in the thought of how things would play out. Then it hit him, work was almost here, so he shoved on his jacket and bolted out the door. Yashio clocked in and headed to work, where he cranked up a giant vacuum that could rip the dirty liquid right out of the mess. Meanwhile, his boss was revving up a floor polisher, burning the tiles into a glassy shine. Misaki hunched over, scraping up every spilled drop, while Yamamoto frantically mopped the floor until it finally looked clean. After they wrapped up the work, they dropped everything and finally took a well-earned break. And Yashio sat down with Yamamoto and had a serious talk. Yashio meant to answer politely, but Yamamoto clocked every look on his face and said they were from the same generation, so he could kick back and talk like they'd known each other forever. They were chatting for a moment, and then Yashio clocked it. Yamamoto was a legit gamer. He hunted down every console game he could get his hands on, then proved he was a real threat, hitting cyber cafes every week to compete and level up his skills. Yamamoto asked Yashio if he played games on his smartphone, and Yashio shrugged, saying he didn't even own one. He always stayed tidy and gamed on his computer instead. Yamamoto nodded and said, "Look, you don't even need a mobile phone if you've got a PC. You can get online anytime, no stress." After their chat, Yashio leaned in and asked Yamamoto, "So what crazy games have been going on lately?" Yamamoto leaned in and admitted he'd been hooked on a game so intense the graphics looked unreal. Then Yashio blurted, "What's it called?" And Yamamoto just froze, unable to remember the name. It all kicked off with pure destruction. Then out of nowhere, their boss showed up and barked, "Time to move." Yashio's frustration flared when he couldn't even catch the game's name, but he realized he only had time to fire up Village of Fate before they rushed out. Then his boss dropped the bomb. "Are you free the last 2 days of November? We're about to get hit with a mountain of requests for the year, and cleanup starts next month." Yashio checked that he was clear to go, then they bolted for home. When he burst into his room, he spotted his computer already blazing with that screenshot. Then it cut off mid-sentence. Surveying the wreckage after Mullies stormed out of the cave, he found a table packed with all sorts of medicinal concoctions, pairing the whole thing with notes that spell out exactly what each one does and the exact dosage. Seeing it, he grinned. Mullies wasn't the monster after all, and he prayed Mullies would return once the villagers had clawed their way through the evil god's temptation. On November 29, Jem climbed up to the watchtower and stood there, staring out like he was guarding the world, scanning the surroundings while the villagers. They sank into prayer, then threw themselves into hard work inside their cave. Yashio clocked the tension on all their faces, then decided to write something to melt their worries. He wrote out the prophecies, laying bare that he truly felt their dread about what was coming tomorrow, and he swore he'd step in and help the moment real danger showed up. He knew this would light a fire under them and force them to lean on their own strength. But he also left a note begging for their understanding, because using the golem as an ally wasn't as simple as it looked. Then the villagers read the prophecy, and joy lit up their faces. A wave of relief hit them, as they realized the god of fate was keeping a watchful eye on them. They finally calmed down and snapped back into focus. Then, watching them smile, Yashio's mood lifted too, even as he still insisted on testing the golem. But he had no clue how to control it, or what rules had to line up before it would even activate. Yashio figured he had nothing left to do and zero sleep in his system, so he shot into the kitchen to whip up his lunch. He threw meat on the grill, loaded up some fruit for dessert, and then dug in like he couldn't wait another second. Suddenly his phone erupted with a ring, his boss on the line. At first Yashio panicked that he'd messed up, but his boss snapped in, "Relax, everything's fine." He'd already smashed the work, but then, surprise, an impromptu job dropped in, and they needed extra hands fast, so with nothing left to do but guard the villagers, he asked when it would wrap up, then his. Ross promised, "It'll be done by 9 at the latest," and that was enough. Yashio figured it'd be fine and jumped in to help. Hearing that, his boss lit up with praise and added, "Yama just vanished for the day," so Yashio basically became the team's lifesaver. As soon as the call ended, Yashio's mind wouldn't stop racing. Why the heck was Yama on leave when he looked totally normal? Then it hit him, maybe he too craved a day off to binge games, so he couldn't keep judging Yama for slipping away. He convinced himself that covering for Yama was a massive favor. And once that thought landed, a grin spread across his face. He tore through his meal and even thanked himself for it. After that, he headed to work, and once everything was done, he caught their boss mid-chat with a client, arguing that you can't change the contract after it's already been set. Every now and then, some people bargained for extra time to get the place cleaned, while Yashio stood there staring at the clock, already hitting 9:15. His boss waved him home and told him he had stuff to handle, but Yashio refused to leave. He stayed planted until the job was done, sure that with the three of them working together, it would all be over in about an hour. After they clocked out and started heading home, a police officer suddenly stepped into their path and told them an accident happened, so they shut the road down, and Yashio glanced at the clock like, it's already 12:37. Fear crawled into his chest as the evil god's temptation started messing with his mind, wondering if the monsters had burst in, slaughtering every villager in their path. He leaned into the moment, demanded his boss stop the car, and bolted out so he could walk home. Yashio's boss apologized for the delay, but Yashio waved it off and told him everything was totally fine. He sprinted straight for his house. It hit me hard. Bad luck doesn't just stop at one punch, it keeps swinging until everything goes wrong again. And prayed it wouldn't strike today. By 1:23 he was still sprinting, and then, finally, he burst through his front door. Panting hard, he couldn't stop thinking. How many years had passed since he'd run like that? Without so much as a pause, he bolted into his room and started to look, staring at the screen, praying the villagers were still safe. He immediately ripped into it and checked it. Ongam sat up on the watchtower, gripping a stick like he was ready for trouble, while the other villagers were fast asleep, dreaming peacefully. No monster rampage showed up, and Yashio finally exhaled, the tension melting off his shoulders. Then boom, his sister showed up at his door, hauling him up for being way too loud in the middle of the night. Sweat poured down his face as he locked eyes with her, and blurted out that he was running out of time. He reached for the door to shut it, muttering that he wasn't going to make a sound again. She noticed sweat soaking him and his uniform caked in grime, then asked if he really didn't want to hit the shower. He darted a glance to the right and promised he'd be at her soon, but she caught him in the act of lying. Noticed how, every single time, he would glance left while he was telling the truth. She shot a look at his computer and demanded why he'd been leaving it on, like something big was coming and she could feel it. He blinked in surprise and asked how she even knew, then she went, "Mom told me, and she told me not to turn off your PC." Yashio's mind flashed back. He'd warned his mom about it, so yeah, that's exactly why she'd warned his sister too. Still, he couldn't spill the game to her, because that note had already warned him. One wrong explanation and he'd lose his chance to play. So he leaned in and told her the game wasn't finished yet. He was just a beta tester. Then he warned her, if he spilled even one detail, he'd get hit with penalties, so he couldn't say anything else. She clocked it as a little sneaky, yeah, but she stepped in and offered to guard the game while he showered, insisting she wouldn't let him catch a cold, and he knew arguing with her was pointless, so he finally nodded and agreed. He told her, "I'll be back in a sec. Watch the game for me." Then leaned in and warned her that something called N was spreading, an outbreak with no clear start time yet, and he made her promise she wouldn't blink or look away from the screen. He told her to sound the alarm the second any monster went after them. She stared at the screen with a confused frown, then caught it. He loved that game way more than he'd admit. Yashio marched off to the shower, convinced a quick rinse would do the trick. Knowing his sister would grill him for not showering right, he slapped on soap and blasted through the shower as fast as he could. Fresh out of the shower, Yashio came back grinning and thanked his sister for covering for him. She teased him that he must have been in and out way too fast, and he just shrugged it off. He said it was fine, as long as he got rid of that sweat. Then he quizzed her about what went down in the game while he was gone, and she swore nothing had changed. She stared at Gams, not moving one bit, and blurted out, "What's going on?" Then she couldn't stop raving about how insanely gorgeous the game's graphics were. Yashio flashed a confident grin and bragged that they'd poured a fortune into the production. Then she narrowed her eyes at him like, "Yeah, prove it," and asked if he was hiding something because whenever guilt hit, he always turned his back on her. So she was freaking right about him, and he couldn't believe it. Yashio finally cracked and admitted he'd been hiding a secret, then swore up and down it wasn't something bad. She pressed, asking if it was the kind of truth he couldn't share with her or even their family, and he nodded, and it was like a silent "yeah" that hit with full agreement. She shot up from the chair, told him she was heading to bed, and swung the door shut behind her. Yashio sat there in stunned silence, replaying in his head just how long it had been since they'd shared a conversation this deep. Seeing their bond creep back to the way it used to be lit him up inside. Then he dropped into a seat, scanned the cave in the game, and still found zero monsters lurking anywhere. He finally got it. He didn't have to sprint home after all, and relief hit hard because nothing had happened, even as the clock screamed 2 a.m. with 22 hours still left until the event. He told himself, no half measures, go all in or don't go at all. Snagging some snacks, Yashio couldn't stop thinking about how brutal it feels to drag an all-nighter these days. Back when he needed nothing but sleep was a regular thing, and it was practically his norm. Grief finally settled in, and somehow, still, no attack came. He figured he could steal a brief breather. He bolted downstairs, flashed a good morning at his family, and then headed straight for the fridge. His mom asked if he'd woken up early, and he said, "Yeah, I've got business in the village," then admitted he'd been online all night long. His dad clocked just how hard he'd been grinding, and Yashio's face flushed. He gave an awkward smile, then nodded like, "Yeah, I'm trying." He stormed back to his room, and the game was exactly the same as before, like nothing had ever happened. The villagers were wide awake now, eyes open and ready for whatever chaos came next. Gams and roadies traded spots on lookout, one keeping watch while the other steadied their nerves. While the women prayed and scrubbed the place clean, he wrestled with his own conflicting feelings. A wild part of him almost hoped the monsters would show up, just so he could finally watch how it all would unfold. But another voice prayed the day would glide by in peace. Drowsiness hit him, so he reached for a cup of coffee, until out of nowhere, something snapped his attention, like the world suddenly flickered and pointed straight at it. A sudden announcement erupted across the screen, and it hit like a gut punch. The evil god's temptation had kicked off. Gams gripped his spear and stood ready to throw down. Yashio watched 5 black dogs surge in as the first wave of the attack. And then it hit him, those fangs could poison you. He couldn't stop wondering whether the dongs would finally throw in the towel during those retreats. Because he already knew they wouldn't just slip in. Getting inside was going to be a brutal uphill fight. Then one of the dogs abruptly backed up out of nowhere. He sprinted forward and launched himself over the fence. Gam dug deep, and drove his spear straight through it in one ruthless strike. Yashio let out a breath of relief, because it killed everything in an instant. But the last 4 dogs followed suit and did the exact same thing. And while Gams was at it, he tore through 2 more and brought them down. 2 of them burst into the village at last. When Yashio clocked the situation, stress slammed into him too, but Gams sprinted hard toward one of the last dogs left. Then he sprang up and slammed it shut in the end. Slashing through with one strike, it ended everything in an instant. Now it all came down to straight one-on-one with the last dog. Gams stormed in, dropped low, slid right under it, and drove his spear up from below. Yashio stared at Gams, and it was like he was absolutely killing it too, right there in that moment. Carol and Kem looked thrilled, screaming and cheering like it was a victory lap as he rode on. Gams snapped at them to stay back. Any closer and they'd risk stumbling into even more monsters. But roadies told him he couldn't feel any more threats, and for once everything was safe. When he spotted everyone finally gathered, Gams wasted no time and went straight to Carol and Chim for help. He demanded they help him heave the monster corpses over. A fence stands there, but then, bam, the road gets trampled right underfoot. They were buzzing with excitement, so he said he and Gams would take care of it, and Layla shot Carol and Kem a wink as she waved them over, because she had something else for them to help with. Meanwhile, roadies and Gams jumped in, hurling monster corpses aside like nothing could stop them. Yashio stared at the screen grinning, convinced they'd wiped out the first wave so effortlessly that the golem might not even be needed to win this fight. 4 hours have crawled by since the evil god's temptation began, and Gams is still holding the line, fending off the monsters all by himself. After he crushed the 4th wave, he finally caught his breath. Shem popped over with water and urged him to drink. Both wild boars and black dogs have already slammed into the village, and that fence has become the one thing holding them back, as the boars could only slam straight into it, while the black dogs scrabbled to jump clean over. Every time they lunged, Gems was already there. He hurled a spear right through the air, and down they went. Yashio clocked the attack pattern on the spot, like clockwork, because the monsters kept lurching in on cue, randomly hitting every 30 to 60 minutes. Kem could patch up the small wounds Gam took after every wave, but Yashio knew the real threat. If those attacks kept slamming non-stop, Gam's stamina would finally hit rock bottom. Once they made it through the day, he knew he couldn't coast. He had to recruit more fighters fast to make sure they stayed standing. He caught sight of Layla cooking, and immediately wondered if he could score some food and a drink too. Then he headed for the kitchen, and his mom snapped, asking if he was really skipping a family meal. So he fired back that he couldn't tear himself away from his PC and he'd be eating in his room. She told him she was cooking his favorite fried chicken, but he swallowed the excitement, apologized, and couldn't look away from the screen. Snagging a few snacks, he dashed back upstairs to his room, already plotting to squeeze in some time later and haul fried chicken up with him. When Yashio slipped back into his room, he froze. 4 black dogs and 3 boars were marching toward him as one. Roadies, stationed up in the tower, spotted them in a split second and shouted a warning to Gams. Everyone sprinted for the cave, and Gam stood his ground with a spear clutched tight. The dogs rocketed over the fence, and Gam coolly skewered them in midair with a spear. Meanwhile, the boars slammed into the fence again and again, until it finally snapped and they poured through. Yashio stared at the clock, wondering if he should call the golem right now, because 5 hours were still left before the day was over. Gams lunged in with his spear and finished off one more enemy. And now he's squaring up with another boar head-on. Gamsted hits the ground hard. The board slammed straight toward him, but gems. It shot straight through its head and dropped it instantly. Yashio erupted in cheers, celebrating Gams's hard-earned victory like it was pure fireworks. Gams yanked the sweat off his brow, darted to the fence, and checked it all fast. He knew it was begging for repairs. Layla pushed them to take a break. Right after that, ****. She and the others barreled over to the fence, scrambling to patch it up before it was too late. Yashio grinned because their teamwork was actually working. Before anyone could blink, the fence got fully repaired. Yashio's eyes snapped wide with shock as he spotted nearly 20 monsters closing in. Gams snapped at everyone to rush back into the cave, right now. Right then, a notification blasted onto Yashio's screen. This was the last wave. He broke into a grin, relief and hype crashing through him, because he knew this final wave would be the end of the whole event. Yashio clocked a few of the monsters right from the start of the game. The ones who came in and smashed the wagons. He checked the file, and all he could pull up was one lonely name, Green Goblin. He clocked the stakes in their hands, and instantly sensed these guys weren't just smart, they were sharp. They didn't just lurch around like the other monsters, they moved and acted like real humans. Meanwhile, those boars just tore through the fence, and now every monster was packed inside, ready to unleash chaos. Gam gripped his spear and stood ready. Then, out of nowhere, suddenly, a massive charging boar rammed into him like a wrecking ball, sending him flying through the air. Kem gasped, her grip slipping as she nearly lost control of herself. But Roadies yanked her back, forcing calm into her shaking body, and Layla jumped in too, blocking Kem's before he could lunge at Gams. Yashio was slammed with shock, panic surging as he frantically searched for the next move. So he snapped into desperate action, activated a miracle, and called the golem to his side. Then blam, the screen exploded into white and snapped to a new scene. From the golem's point of view, now it was like I was in first person, and Yashio realized he'd been dropped inside the cave. With the controller in hand, he started steering the golem, gripping a sword in its right hand. As he came blazing toward the villagers, and he just couldn't believe it. Eyes bulged in pure shock as they realized the statue was actually moving. They swore it was the god of fate. So Yashio clenched his resolve, grabbed the golem's head, and charged for the exit, telling himself he'd save Gams no matter what. Meanwhile, Gams lay badly hurt, but he clenched his will tight and refused to quit, swearing he'd stop the monsters from passing no matter what it cost him, even if it meant giving up his life. Suddenly, a green goblin burst into a charge toward it. Gams surged in and yanked him back, but the gems still found a way to smash through and break free. Right as the golem was about to strike again, Yashio burst in and carved the monster open with a single slash. Relief washed over Yashio as a grin split his face, and he told himself, "This is my time to fight," because Gams had absolutely crushed it. Right after that, black dogs barrel in, snapping at them. Yet Yashio slashes them down with his sword like it's nothing. Pride surged as he crushed them with zero effort, and relief washed over him because he'd saved his fate points just for this exact moment. After memorizing the enemy's attack patterns and every move from earlier battles, it had already happened before. Easier than ever to tear them down. With the controls finally feeling right, Yashio couldn't help thinking it would have been better if he could use his main character too. Then he spots a perspective switch button on the screen. With pure curiosity, he clicked it and snapped into a third-person view, where he could spot both his golem and his own character on screen. He stared at the screen and realized the figure didn't match what he'd been picturing at all. Then it slammed into him, hard like the wooden staff. Gams and Chim had carved it into the world, serving as the living embodiment of the god of fate. After he wiped out every last monster, a sudden notification blasted onto the screen. The evil god's temptation hits, and it won't let go. Yashio surged with pure joy, finally feeling the weight lift off his shoulders after saving the villagers at last. The villagers stared at him, eyes shining with pure excitement and heartfelt gratitude. He thanked him for fighting off the danger and keeping them safe. Yashio's chest swelled with pride, until the moment he tried to move the golem and found his body locked up like it had betrayed him. A warning message flashed on screen, and it revealed the golem had already started eating. Every second felt like it was stealing time from him, and once the points drained out, the golem froze dead still. Another note flat out said it could only be activated once per day, and Yashio was so shocked he couldn't even wrap his head around how insanely expensive it was. He figured it would torch through thousands of yen in a blink. Then his mood crashed as he likened it to one of those pay-to-win smartphone games. As he basked in the villagers' pure joy, their faces cheered him up. He probably told himself he'd managed to save them, and he fought hard to stay positive. Then he carved a chilling prophecy for the villagers, swearing that the attacks would finally stop for good. And they absolutely crushed it. They practically burst with joy, then lifted the statue with trembling hands and set it back on the altar like it was sacred. They dropped to their knees, praying and thanking him like his help was a miracle. Yashio scanned the area like a hawk, just to make sure everything was safe, and then he finally noticed that. They left behind bodies that had to be cleaned up, because, just like real life, they didn't magically vanish like in other games. He spotted an arrow jammed into one of the boar corpses, and it hit him hard. Malice wasn't just watching, he'd been helping them too. The very next day at work, Yama showed up and apologized to Yashio for disappearing last month, then thanked him for having his back. Yashio shot back that he'd be tied up with his own stuff at the end of the month, so if Yama had vanished then, there'd have been no way to help. But because it all happened the day before, everything finally fell into place. With a grateful smile, Yama bought Yashio a drink. Yashio ordered hot milk tea, took a sip, and then casually asked why Yama had been gone. Yama begged him, "Don't tell the boss," and Yashio's gamer instincts kicked in. He just couldn't resist. He finally confessed it was just for a limited-time game event. Yashio burst into laughter, stunned because he'd expected it to feel like a real date, and Yama kept teasing that he'd been scared Yashio might get upset. Then he leaned in and said the game he mentioned earlier hooked you instantly, and the whole event was scheduled for the very end of the month. Yashio's eyes narrowed, wondering if this was the dreaded village of fate, so he asked straight up whether the game was all role-play and building. And when Yamashika said that wasn't his thing, Yashio just grinned, because he only cared about clean, no-nonsense PvP. Hearing what Yama meant, he realized it had nothing to do with the village of fate, so he told Yama he'd tried those same games before, but he just wasn't any good. Yama's face fell when he heard that. He wanted to pitch a few game titles, but now it felt like there was no point. Yashio said it was actually pretty cool to talk games during the break and after that. Yashio turned back home, glanced at the computer, and saw the villagers had already cleared away the monster corpses. Now they were hammering and rebuilding the fence fast. Curious as hell, he dove into the chat logs. Rhodey's was telling Gams to take a break, but Gams. He snapped that he couldn't rest 1 second, since he was the one steering the hard labor. Then he swore to everyone he'd be fine. Chairman Carroll even snapped at him not to grind himself into the ground. But Gams kept insisting he was perfectly fine, until Layla suddenly stepped in, telling them to stay out of Gams' way and to ask for help instead. Yashio smiled, genuinely impressed by how hard the villagers worked and how deeply dedicated they were. Yashio flicked his fate points, and there it was, rising just a little like the universe was turning up the pressure. Probably all because the villain's gratitude finally hit back. He spotted Rhodey's and Gems hauling a monster corpse, and figured they were about to let him claim it as his own tribute. He figured he'd finally get some meat tomorrow, then realized the fridge needed that clear space, so he stormed into the kitchen. Just as he stood there, Seiyuki burst in with a bright smile and blurted, "I'm home." While he was cooking for himself, he leaned over and asked her if she wanted a bite too. And she didn't hesitate, she agreed. As soon as she was done, Seiyuki lit up and showered the cook with a big, happy compliment about the food. She lit up, said it tasted amazing, thanked him, and then asked for a kiss, because apparently that's how you show appreciation. Yashio clocked the alcohol reeking off her, and immediately wondered if she'd been drinking too much. She dove into the food like a kid who couldn't wait, and Yashio clocked it instantly. She was late again. So he asked if she was okay, and she barely spoke, just looked straight up stressed. Yashio felt the shift in the air and softly asked if she had anything on her mind, and when she opened up, he admitted he might not be the best brother, but he knew that just talking could help her breathe easier. After a tense beat, she finally admitted it. Lately, she'd had this gut feeling that someone was staring at her or tailing her. She told me she'd felt something wild just recently while she was at a convenience store nearby, but she couldn't tell if it was truly happening or if her imagination was playing tricks on her. Yashio shot a thought right away. What if this was the same stalker from back then? He spilled everything about the last incident and admitted he'd been losing sleep ever since she started coming home late lately. She blinked in shock and asked, "So you're really worried?" Yashio nodded hard because no matter what, he was her older brother. She confessed that she figured he despised her, and he admitted he'd just assumed it was normal for her to hate him. Then she grinned and told him her big brother was finally slipping back into his old self. Way cooler now and way more badass. Yoshi wondered if she said it because she was smiling, and then he told her, "If you're ever late, call me, I'll come get you." She asked if he'd grabbed his phone from their mom, and he nodded yes, but warned her he might not always pick up if he was up cleaning late at night. She warned him to never repeat his past reckless mistakes, and he nodded, swearing he'd do better this time. Still shaking with fear, she couldn't shake it. He thought this time is different asterisk, and the moment he felt it, everything changed. He knew he had to do something, anything, to protect her with his life. The very next day, right after Yashio clocked out, he sprinted toward home. He told his boss, "I've got to swing by the convenience store," so his boss tossed him out right there and left him standing in the chaos. Yashio spun in place, scanning the store in a flash. I couldn't stop thinking about Sayuki's stalker, and I kept wondering if they were lurking nearby right this moment. Snatching up groceries, he suddenly drifted back to the day he ended up hospitalized. Luckily, his body took no lasting damage, yet Sayuki sobbed nonstop the whole time. Afterward, both he and Sayuki got apology letters, but all they held were cheap, empty lines that said nothing and fixed nothing. After snagging the groceries, Yashio charged straight back home. Along the way, he spotted someone grimacing as they tried to wrestle something off the ground. He charged over to help, and there, like a punch to the heart, was Seikka, his childhood friend. He jumped at the chance to pick it up for her, and she thanked him. She admitted it had been ages since they last laid eyes on each other. Seikka was Yashio's childhood best friend. She lived right next door, and they'd been inseparable since they were born. Growing up side by side, they marched through every school together, right up to the final year of university. Fresh out of graduation, she snagged the job of her dreams at a real company and finally made it. In the early years, Seikko kept visiting and sending him emails, but Yashio, drowning in shame, couldn't bring himself to reply. This was the first time they'd crossed paths in 10 brutal years. Yashio spotted her leg and blurted, "You okay?" Seikka nodded, then admitted she'd been spacing out on the stairs and totally missed a step. She snapped at her to be more careful, then leaned in and asked, "Do you remember when we were kids, how you hurt yourself climbing that tree and tumbling down?" Heat rose in her face, and she quickly told him to never bring up those memories again. Seikko stared at his outfit and he told me he was juggling a part-time job at a cleaning company. A wave of shame crashed over him, and he stalled for a beat. Then she told him, "It's nothing, really," then promised she'd have his back no matter what. Her sweet words lit him up, and he hurriedly thanked her for her kindness. Then, spotting the cold creeping in, he blurted an apology for leaving her out there too long. He told her to go home and warm up, and she grinned, saying she was just happy they finally got a chance to catch up after all that time. Then she strode into her house, and Yashio began the walk home, buzzing with joy because their talk had gone so smoothly. Especially because it was their first run together in a decade. He clocked that Seikka hadn't really changed, but then his face snapped like a shock hit him. No way, he thought, she needed to be taught and fast. She talked to him like he mattered, right there. Because kindness was her whole point, and after a decade out in the world, she'd grown into a real, mature adult. Freshly hired, he dove headfirst into a wild mix of good wins and brutal setbacks. That distance between them felt unbreakable, like it would never, ever close. That thought hit him like a gut punch, and sadness flooded his chest. Suddenly, Seikka shot back into view and called out to him, loud and urgent. Yashio stood there, utterly stunned. She told him a brand-new sweets cafe had popped up right in front of the station, and since it's packed with young people, she can't bring herself to go alone. She asked if they could go together once her leg healed, and Yashio froze, stunned, awkward, and completely thrown off. He shot back that he loved sweets too, She lit up with joy and promised she'd email him later, counting down the minutes. Still blushing, she hurried back home in a flash, leaving Yashio frozen there, and he jolted, stunned, and couldn't tell if this was a date. Then the second Yashio reached home, he was buzzing with a wild, burning excitement. He was totally thrown off by his own feelings, especially with Sayuki's stalker still hanging over everything, and he couldn't even figure out what the point of being happy was. He stepped inside, and his mother was already in the kitchen, grinning at him like a ray of sunshine. As she told him dinner was ready, he flashed a smile back, like it didn't quite feel normal somehow. She clocked something off in his smile, and it made her wonder what was really wrong. A few days later, he suddenly had the entire day off. He plopped in front of his computer like, "Finally, I can game all day." Yashio couldn't stop thinking about it. Sayuki's stalker hadn't shown up at all lately, and he couldn't help wondering if she'd just convinced herself it was real, like she'd said before. Then it hit him. Next Sunday, he'd have a date with Seikka, and he'd better plot his next move to survive the evil god's temptation in the game. He stared at the golem and knew it would only come out when everything else failed, because it was boxed in by way too many limits. And that thought gnawed at him even more when he realized Gams was still the village's only real military muscle. So he started weighing which miracle would actually save the day. Suddenly, Yashio spotted Mullies heading back to the village, and he just knew. This was the perfect chance to bring him in as one of them. The moment everyone saw Mullies, they lit up with warm welcomes, and Carol practically tackled him with a huge hug the second he stepped through. Mullies threw out a heartfelt apology for bolting off on his own. Layla snapped it off as shameful talk, then soothed him, telling him they were all grateful and nobody had a single complaint. Kem insisted it had to be a sign from the god of fate. Yashio couldn't stop admiring how kind and forgiving the villagers were. There wasn't a single one he could bring himself to hate, and Gams turned around and thanked Mullies for the help he pulled from behind the scenes. And Maul's assembly shot back that all they could do was throw in whatever they had to offer. He shot out another apology and bowed his head low. He said, "I've got something I need to ask you guys," and the villagers just stared, totally baffled. But Gam insisted that Mullis' kindness had to be repaid, and straight up asked what Mullis' kindness needed. Then Mullies ripped away the mask and confessed his real identity. He wasn't a doctor at all, but a stranger from another race, living deep in the forbidden forest. Mullies finally dropped the truth. He'd been keeping a close eye on them ever since they stepped into the forest. Yashio stopped for a second, noticed the Z, wondered if Mullies was an elf, and then Kem snapped for the first time, demanding to know if this meant he already understood just how deadly the evil god's temptation was lurking out in the forest. Yashio was blindsided by the sudden shift in her tone, and Malice hurriedly apologized again. He finally admitted he had a hunch, then broke it down. This latest attack felt way more organized than anything they'd seen before. Gams nodded, because during the last two attacks he'd seen the monsters act totally off, ripping through people with brutal ferocity during the evil god's temptation. And still, none of it had ever looked this coordinated before. Rhodey swore he'd never seen anything like an organized attack on a village before, but Gamza brushed that off and turned to Mullies, demanding to know what he wanted from them. Mullies then confessed that the evil god's temptation had wiped out his own village. When they heard that, the whole group went silent in shock, and Yashio felt it too. He couldn't believe it. Mullies' people had lived in that forest for generations, so they should have been ready for monster raids, yet they were wiped out anyway. Mullies leaned in and said the attack was on a whole other level, way bigger than anything they'd ever seen. A bunch of different monsters surged in together, and he couldn't shake the feeling this was no random rampage. It was planned, organized, and led by a mastermind. Based on what that surviving villager had whispered to them before death snuffed their voice out. Gams demanded to know if anyone from Mullies' village had lived, and begged for a path to safety. But Mullies crushed the hope and said every single person was gone, then added that around 10 children's bodies were missing too. That made him fear they'd been dragged straight into a monster's nest. Yashio's heart sank hard, and he couldn't stop picturing just how brutal and heartbreaking that must have been for Mullies. Mullies said there was still a shot the kids were alive, and then he just couldn't shake that gut-wrenching feeling. Worrying about them felt like dead time, until Jem snapped to his feet and blurted, "Let's go." Jem's sheer resolve stunned both him and Mullies. Kem lunged into the room, snatched up weapons, and told him she'd join right away. Then Rhoda shot back, saying they needed to pack food and water before they set off. So he turned to Layla and told her to take care of it, and Mullies practically lit up, thanking them over and over for stepping in to help. Even Yashio was proud of them. Then he slid into that heavy, bittersweet feeling as he sat there, watching everyone hustle to help and wishing he could do more. Yashio realized he could only trigger the prophecy once a day, so he held it back, waiting for the moment it mattered most. Because any try to activate the golem would burn his points long before it even hit its destination, and that helpless feeling left him thinking. For now. All he could do was stare and wait. Gams told everyone it was okay, as long as only he went with Mullies for the rescue. And while the others hurried deeper into the cave, Kem refused to stay behind. She insisted on going with them, swearing she could heal any injured kids they found. And when Gams warned it was too dangerous, Kem just shot back that she knew the risks. And it hit him with one final reminder. Their faith wasn't just hope, it was backed by the gods' protection. Yashio loved the plan. He figured he could steer them through the prophecies while leaving the rest squarely to Gams. Gams couldn't shake her. She was never going to change her mind. Then Carol shoved a tiny statue of the god of fate into his hands, carved by her own 2 hands. Jem stepped up and told everyone, "Don't worry, we're coming back." Layla and Rhodys told them, "Don't sweat it, just head back fast," and warned them to return the moment danger showed up. Carol grinned and promised she'd cook up something delicious, then wait right there for them with that. "All right, Gams." Chairman Mullies spun up and shot off toward their destination. Yashio caught on that Molas had already cracked the monster's nest location. So they wouldn't be there in time, they'd be there in a blink. Still, frustration crushed him. He could do nothing but sit there and watch. They pulled up by the river, dropped their guard, and finally caught their breath, right there where. They dropped into their seats, cracked open some water, and started gulping it down. Yashio clocked it instantly. Chum looked completely wiped out, like he'd been running on fumes all day. An hour had already slammed by since they tore out of the village. Mullies admitted he didn't know how many monsters were still standing since most had been wiped out along with the villagers, and he could only pray there weren't many left. Gams admitted his gut feeling. Those surviving monsters weren't harmed at all. Mullies laid it out. 3 monster types exist, and his gut said it was a green goblin snatching those kids. As they somehow managed to drag their prey back alive, Yashio spiraled over the kidnapped kids. Are they going to be okay? And the more he looked at this game, the more real it felt, until he couldn't stop fearing he'd witness something truly cruel. After a quick breather, Mullies snapped that it was time to move, and as they marched, he suddenly caught something, then yelled for everyone to duck fast. They dove behind the bushes and spotted a green goblins are rampaging through the area. Yashio shot a quick glance and counted 9 of them, and he figured it'd be way too risky for Malos and Gems to take on that many enemies all at once. Molas muttered that if the sky wasn't so damn clear, they could have slipped around unnoticed way easier. Hearing that, Yashio couldn't help but wonder, could he actually make it rain? He suddenly slammed into his memory the game's weather control option. He clicked, and just like that, a whole list of weather options popped onto the screen. As he scrolled, he saw sheets of torrential rain outside, and immediately worried how that storm could smash up everything. Option after he picked torrential rain, a city circle snapped onto the screen, outlining the exact spots where Yashio could summon rain. The bigger the circle got, the more faith points it gulped, so he adjusted the science to pinpoint every last square inch where the goblins were hiding. As soon as he confirmed it, the sky cracked, and rain came down in a pounding rush. The trio craned their necks at the sky, baffled. Then the sight hit them as the green goo. Goblins bolted for their tents to dodge the downpour, and the second Kem glanced at the Bible in her arms. A faint sparkle flickered from it. And say it's gotta be a sign from the god of faith. Gams barked at Chim to clutch her gear tight and slip forward as quietly and lightly as she could. She gripped his weapon tight and crouched behind the bushes, holding her breath and waiting for the right moment. While Gams and Mullies forged ahead, they slipped into the tents in eerie silence, creeping closer and closer to sneak in and wipe out the goblins from the inside. After a bit, they finally went for it. Slaughter every last goblin, without ever once getting spotted. But somehow, no matter how hard they searched, the children just wouldn't turn up. Yashio stared as they slipped by, totally unseen. After everything else, there was just one last place left to hunt. Gams jabbed a finger at it and ordered him, "You go first." As he sprinted toward the cave, a colossal monster burst out of nowhere. A blazing red cyclops. Everyone went silent, completely blown away by how enormous it was. The cyclops strikes again. Gams barely slipped out of the slash with his sword, one breath away from getting cut. Malash loosed an arrow straight into the monster, but it shrugged it off like nothing. Yashio's whole world just exploded in shock at how that monster's hide looked nearly unbreakable, wondering if they even had a shot at beating it. He dug into the monster's file and immediately found it was an ogre, built for brutal power and infamous for devouring humans. The Cyclops swung for Gams, but he dodged the blow at the last second and fired back fast, until the Cyclops slammed his weapon in front and stopped him cold. They traded punches again and again, and right in the middle of that chaos, Mullies kept forcing himself to loose arrow after arrow at the Cyclops, but they shattered the moment they slammed into its unforgiving hide. Yashio froze in shock, realizing this monster was the strongest one he'd ever faced. He knew that if Gams took a direct hit, it would spell real danger for him in an instant. Might not be able to protect himself. Mullies realized regular arrows stood no chance, so he snapped that he had to unleash his family's secret poison. Then he showed it off like a curse from generations, warning that not a single person had ever survived it. But the truth was brutal. He just didn't have the strength to punch through the Cyclops' brutal hide. Yashio could feel it. Every option was slipping away fast. He seriously thought about dropping a prophecy, just to signal them to make a break for it. But he had this sinking doubt. Could they really bolt past the red Cyclops without getting torn up? He even weighed letting Gams fight it off while the others slipped away, but that plan failed. Yashio tore his own nerves apart, trying to figure out how to flip the whole mess around. Then, a wild idea hit him out of nowhere. He scribbled his strategy and laid out a prophecy for them in a flash, and slammed the thunderstorm miracle into action, scrunching its space down as tight as it could go. Right when the Cyclops was about to strike down Gams, the moment snapped into chaos. Yashio unleashed a storm. Then boom, lightning tore through the sky and slammed into the monster. But the strike wasn't strong enough to finish it. That hit tore the power right out of the Cyclops in an instant. Mullies lunged forward and loosed his arrow, securing both the poison and the little guy in place. Of Fate's statue to it, he aimed straight for the Cyclops' mouth. But right before that arrow could land, the monster slammed his weapon in front of it, cutting off the attack. Moving at lightning speed, he unleashed the summon golem miracle. Then they unleashed the golem, jamming the poison straight into the Cyclops' mouth. The monster clawed at its own neck. He suddenly caught it. Something was seriously, terribly wrong. Yashio handed them the prophecy for the plan. Once it was locked in, everything was about to kick off. Now it was on him. He had to make sure that poison surged straight into the Cyclops' mouth. They nailed the plan, and just seconds later, the monster's body started to buckle under the poison's deadly bite, crumpled to the ground and died on the spot. Yashio threw their hands up in victory, proud that every single one of them had teamed up to win. Once the Cyclops was finally dropped, it was go time. Save those kids and bring them back safe. Gems promised he'd charge in first and hunt down any more enemies before anyone else moved. After a bit, he returned with a face full of heartbreak. Mullies was ordered to step inside and confirm what he'd seen, and Chum practically begged to go with him. But her protective older brother barked for her to stay behind. He couldn't bear for her to witness what was coming. Mullies came back and the heat hit like a wave. He finally snapped, couldn't hold it in, and crumpled to the ground. Burdened by crushing grief, you thank Gams and Chim for helping him. Gems urged him to lift his chin and push through. They were all crushed by what they'd uncovered. Yashio, stuck on the sidelines, couldn't stop the tears pouring from his eyes. Then Kem turned to Malice, begging to pray for the children so their souls could finally rest, and Malice nodded and agreed. Yashio stood there in horror as they lowered the children into the ground, realizing most games would just skip right past moments like this. But this one blew the whole thing wide open. The brutal truth that life ends and death doesn't care. He dug graves for the kids, then dropped to his knees and prayed like he could bring them back. Kem shot Mullies a question. Would he come back with them to their village? Gam nodded along, because the moment he saw everyone's faces, he could tell they were all terrified for him. Mullies nodded, and the whole crew snapped into action, ready to roll back together. When they finally made it back to the cave, Carol greeted them with open arms and a warm, welcoming smile. Mullies hugs Carol, and Layla pulled Kem into a warm hug, soothing the quiet tears as they kept spilling. Rhodys threw out loud praise for everyone's grind, then promised he'd cook up a feast for them himself. Layla told Mullies he could stay right by his side for as long as he needed. Ashio watched it all unfold, and tears streamed down his face. Years passed, and the weight of how hard they fought just kept pressing down on him, so he couldn't help but wonder what Mullies would do next. Yashio prayed he'd join them as a comrade, but deep down he knew Mullies would force them to stick together and not let them go. No matter what Malice chose, Yashio prayed his wounds would seal up fast, like he couldn't bear another second of the pain. Next, Mullies stood on the very edge of a cliff, staring down like the world was about to crack open. Then he instantly launched off the edge. Yashio jerked back in terror, snapping awake because it was all just a nightmare. Terror clawed at him as he bolted to his PC, desperate to check on Mullies. As soon as the screen flickered to life, he spotted Mullies sitting at a table in dead silence. Remembering how Mullies had been torturing himself all night long, Yashio's gut told him the worst was coming. Over breakfast, Carol leaned in and told everyone she hadn't seen Mullies slip out of his room. And he couldn't shake the feeling he might just be starving. Rhodey's leaned in and promised her it was okay. Mullies just needed a little more time to heal. Yashio racked his brain for a way to lift the villagers' spirits. So pay attention. There's a brand new option called *egg gotcha* popping up. The description says you can use it for free once a month. And when you do, it can randomly hatch a reptile, a monster, or even some insanely rare creature. Once it hatched, it latched onto the very first person it saw, and became fiercely loyal to them. Yashio figured if it was a bird, they'd score a steady stash of eggs, and if it was a reptile, they could grill it up or keep it as a pet. And if it was a monster, they'd train it up for battle and unleash it when the fight started. Because it was free, he couldn't resist and slammed the button. The screen jerked, snapped into focus, and landed on a plain, ordinary egg. No hint at all about what kind of wagon it was. Then a note popped up, promising it would be parked near the village. Yashio froze when he realized the egg wasn't handed straight to the villagers. It was ditched somewhere out near the village. He finally tracked it down, then panicked over how to warn the villagers, so he scribbled a prophecy to deliver the truth. A few minutes later, Carol burst in, eyes blazing, proudly holding up the egg for everyone to see. She could barely contain her excitement to cook it up in an egg dish, but later. Le quickly jerked her back and snapped that they couldn't touch it, because it was a gift from God. Carol nodded, then set the egg right down before the god of faith. He set the statue up to thank him. Carol didn't realize this was where they laid tributes to their god. Then, without warning, the egg vanished right out of sight. Layla fired off a shot, bolted to the statue, and blurted out an apology, because she suddenly realized they'd handed the egg to God as an offering by mistake. Yashio was stunned, praying the egg would land in his hands tomorrow. He suddenly feared it could be dangerous to eat if it wasn't a chicken egg, and panic started crawling in as he wondered what kind of egg it really was. He went digging online, compared pics of other eggs, and realized they looked a lot like reptile eggs. He even toyed with the idea that it could be a monster egg, but the thought felt totally insane to him. He could only pray it was something like a lizard or a snake, something he could raise as a pet without getting hurt. But then worry crashed into him. How would his family even react? The very next day, when the parcel finally showed up, his mother wasted no time telling him what it was all about. She asked if it was the meat or fruit again. Then he cracked open the package, and she gasped at the egg, instantly clocking that it definitely wasn't from a chicken. He told her it could have been a reptile egg, and she burst out laughing like it was the funniest thing ever. Maybe he was trying to raise a reptile just to wow Seikka. Confused and wide-eyed, Yashio couldn't believe what his mother just dropped on him. She and his father used to be obsessed with reptiles, and she crammed a whole room full of lizards she'd painstakingly raised. Yashio, who'd never even stepped into a room before, was left reeling when he finally learned what this new truth revealed about his mother. Yashio finally understood. He had to step up and put real effort into strengthening his bond with his family. When his mother finally made it home, he decided he'd go straight to her and beg for advice on how to raise that egg. Over dinner, his mother brought it up and told them Yashio was craving advice from his dad and his sister, so his father leaned in and demanded, "What's this about?" Yashio spilled that the village had sent him a reptilian egg, and when they asked if he wanted to raise it, he said yes without hesitation. Knowing Seikka and his dad were both reptile lovers, Seikka jumped at the chance to help, even while admitting she wasn't a pro, and promising she could still teach him a few tricks. Then his dad stepped in too, telling Yashio he'd got a full stash of equipment for raising reptiles tucked away, and that Yashio could come to him with any questions. Yashio couldn't believe it. His family was so cooperative and supportive that he burst into genuine happiness, thanked them again and again, and realized he felt way closer to them than he ever expected. Then he hurried everyone to his room and cracked the mystery open, showing his family the egg. They studied it and guessed it had to be from a gecko, or maybe a crocodile, like what even is this? Seikka even started wondering if owning tiny crocodiles was legal. As they talked, almost everything just whooshed right over Yashio's head. Seikka's father told her to set up a feeder and water bowl for the egg. Side by side, they built a cozy little habitat for it, and when they saw how it turned out, pure happiness lit up their faces. His dad told him they wouldn't know what it was until it finally hatched. Then he leaned in and reminded Yashio to snap pictures the moment it broke out. Yashio thanked them, and with that, the weight on his chest finally lifted. 2 reptile lovers were now in his family. Then it hit him. Somehow, by pure coincidence, his bond with his family kept getting stronger day after day, all because of the village of fate. That's when it hit him. He started to believe for real in the living god of faith. A few days later, Yashio showed up dressed totally different from his usual style, and his mom's eyes snapped to him right away. She leaned in and asked if he was going on a date, but he hesitated and couldn't bring himself to answer. She leaned in with a teasing grin and asked who that girl really was. Yashio waved it off like it was nothing, told her it didn't matter at all, and promised he'd be back later. Then he rushed over to beat Seikka and just stood there waiting for a while. When she finally shows up, she blurts out an apology for making him wait. He asked how her leg felt, and she lit up and told him it was fine again. They slipped into the cafe together, and Yashio immediately clocked that it was the kind of place that wasn't a place meant for anyone to sneak in solo. After her order finally showed up, she dove into the food like it was pure treasure, then turned to him and insisted it was so delicious she could eat it forever. Seeing her grinning like that made Yashio's heart lift, and he swore she looked exactly the same as she did when she was 20. While they were chatting, she let it slip that she used to pig out on his mom's cooking all the time, then leaned in and asked what he'd been up to. She told me Yashio's mother had reached out and explained everything, how he'd been helping revitalize a village online, and how talking with the villagers brought his bright, cheerful spirit roaring back. Yashio was stunned that his mom had been talking about him like that, but he had to admit it was true. Then she leaned in and asked what kind of village it even was. Yashio hesitated because he didn't dare spill the whole truth about the village of fate. He was terrified he'd lose the right to play, yet he couldn't stand the thought of her judging him for blowing cash on microtransactions. After that tense hush, she shot the question at him again, eyes locked on his. At last, he flashed a grin and told me it was a tiny village, just a handful of villagers, nothing more. But every single one of them was incredibly kind, and they stuck together like they were family. Tell them every villager has their own job and pulls their weight. Even under brutal conditions, it still hits like a brick wall, really hard. Seeing them live like that lit a fire in him, and suddenly, he knew he had to change for the better, too. He leaned in and told me why he took the new job, then spilled the real details about the village like they were secrets. With a sweet little smile, she asked him if he really cared about those villagers, and he nodded, fully agreeing. When he told her about Gams and how Jem and Carol kept turning everything into playful brawls, her smile exploded. She looked happier than ever that he was finally talking so freely. As they headed back home, she turned to Yashio and thanked him for everything. He rolled up, thanked Bae for the treat, but when he tried to pay, she shut it down. She reminded him, "You're the guest I invited, so I'm covering it." Yashio flashed a smile and swore that next time he'd pay for everything, no excuses. She asked if he'd go out with her again, and he nodded immediately. He'd do it as long as she was truly fine with it. He grinned, promised they'd link up again soon, and just like that, the two of them headed home together. When Yashio finally came back, he bolted to his room and then swore there had to be a bug lurking somewhere nearby. Snatching a roll of poster paper, he swings it down to handle the problem. He spun around frantic, but there was nothing, no clue, no answers. Right then, a loud cracking sound snapped through the air. He snapped his gaze to the egg, and there it was, already cracking open as it hatched right in front of him. Shock hit him hard because this was way too soon, and all he could do was stare, heart-pounding, while the shell shattered piece by piece. Stress crawled up his spine as he stared into the unknown, desperate to find out what was about to come next. Yashio's nerves were on fire as he tore through the place looking for Sayuki's notes, but they just wouldn't show up. Suddenly, a lizard bursts out of the egg like it's been waiting for this moment. He let out a shaky breath, finally relieved it was nothing more than some weird monster creeping around. He stared at the tiny creature, grinned at how adorable it was, and immediately imagined raising it with careful love. He snapped a quick photo, shot it over to Sayuki and his dad, then dove online to figure out exactly what species it was. He spotted more lizards that looked alike, but none of them shone like this one, golden as treasure, and he couldn't shake the thought that maybe it was glowing because it had just hatched. As he stared at it, the lizard snapped its gaze back to him, and both of them froze, locked in an intense stare. Yashio froze, then he heard his mom calling his name out of nowhere. The dinner was ready, and the whole room felt like it was about to explode with anticipation. He strode up to the table, clocked Suyuki's slump, and asked, right then, if he wasn't checking his phone. Shocked, he blurted out an apology and swore he hadn't even checked it. She told him she'd already sent a picture of a lizard and asked if he'd check it when he got home. He grabbed her worries by the collar, told her to breathe, and promised he'd bring it straight to her. When he stormed back to his room, he froze, because the lizard was sitting right on the... He stared at the floor, stunned that it had slipped out of its case like it had a mind of its own. He snatched it up and rushed over to show them. Then, right when it was about to land, their mom reminded them it was time to eat and their dad. Frustration was seconds from boiling over. They told him in a calm voice to eat first, then they'd hang out with the lizard afterward. After dinner, they rushed back to his room, and when they saw the lizard glowing a golden shade, they couldn't believe their eyes. Suyuki snapped a pic and said Japan is packed with golden five-line skinks and grass lizards, but this one was so bright it looked like real gold up close. Yashio leaned over and asked his dad, still glued to his phone, if it looked like an armadillo lizard, then couldn't help but wonder whether that golden glow was just some weird mutation. Suyuki leaned in and asked if the villagers had spilled anything about what Yashio's lizard actually devours. He told them it had been snacking on fruit from the village. Then his dad snapped, "Did you ask the villagers what species it is?" And Yashio shot back, thinking fast. He told them the village was in Hokkaido and dodged every question about where the ideas came from. Suyuki promised they understood, but he still demanded they keep it secret and never show those photos to anyone. He said the lizard can munch on fruit for now, but they'd better dig into what it'll eat later. After that, they all break off and hustle back to their rooms. Yashio noticed the sick part. His family never once stepped into his room, even with the door left unlocked, and though he couldn't prove it, he figured they'd start checking on the lizard way more often now. To guard his privacy, he shut off his monitor every time he stepped out of the room. As he turned his attention to the village, he caught Carol already knocked out, fast asleep. Layla and Rhodey's were in the middle of a tense, blow-by-blow stress talk about Mullies. Meanwhile, Kem leaned in and begged Gams, "Can you pray one more time for the kids of Mully's village?" The Yams promised they'd go back together to pray one more time once they finally felt better. Then he peeked into Mully's room and found him sitting there, silently locked in on a book. Kem's made it look eerily similar to the Bible. Mully stared at that book, fuming because his god wouldn't lift a finger, while the god of fate got in and helped. Yashio's eyes widened. This thing looked just like Kem's Bible, a massive tome packed with god-level teachings that Mullies and his people swore by. Because the Bible was meant to be read, malice started gripping that the gods owed him blessings, so when they didn't show up, complaints burned in his heart. Yashio suddenly realized, if the villagers got attacked while he was stuck at work, and he couldn't lift a finger to save them, it could shatter their faith. He couldn't stop asking himself if he'd have to fall back into that life again, but he refused. He wasn't going back to who he used to be. Instead, he craved a way easier system that would make everything run smoother. Right then, his eyes snapped to a brand new option for a connection system, and he realized he could pull the whole thing up right on his phone, too. He snatched the download in a flash and tore into the app the moment it was ready. He couldn't believe it. Somehow, he was actually pulling off miracles and hearing prophecy. And from there, it all spiraled fast, like the next move was inevitable. That relief hit him hard, because it meant he could sneak out during work breaks to check on the villagers. The very next day, Yashio strolled home from work, glanced at the case, and found the lizard still munching away. You spot it, Dad and Suyuki still haven't come home. So he couldn't stop wondering, did his mom feed it? Then he stormed over to his PC, checked on the village, and boom. Everyone was laughing and hanging out together like one big happy crew. Mullies burst in and with a sincere grin and heavy guilt, apologized to everyone for the trouble he caused. He leaned in and begged them to let him stay in the village, too. He said he'd been thinking about fleeing the forest, praying some of his comrades were still breathing, but he had no clue what waited beyond those trees. So yeah, this village was the only place where he could finally breathe and call life his own. He dropped his gaze and fired off his request. Gams lit up hearing that and told them there was zero reason to turn him down. Everyone erupted in cheers and greeted Mollis with open arms, and Yashio couldn't help but beam at the sight, and told everyone that his villagers were the absolute best. He spotted a fresh notification. Mullies had moved into the villa. Now he could dig into his own past info too. Then the screen hit him with the truth. Mollis was 151, and she wasn't male at all, she was female. He couldn't stop wondering how she still looked like she was in her 20s, like that was just what elves did. Mullies then seized Gams's hand, and with a sharp grin, realized she still hadn't spilled her gender to everyone yet, thankfully. Maybe this way, Kem finally won't feel so shaky about Mullies tagging along on her hunting trips. Yashio's heart soared with the new villager, and he clung to hope that things would finally turn out right. From here on out, they were finally gonna click, every single one of them. Suddenly, Sayuki's name lit up his phone, and the call came in hot. He asked what was wrong, and she snapped that he needed to hurry right now because the second she stepped off the bus, she felt it, like someone's eyes were locked on her. She bolted straight into the convenience store. She sounded terrified, so he stepped in and told her to breathe and calm down. While he headed out, he snapped to her, "Don't you leave the store." Yashio sprinted straight toward her and his. A lizard fixed its eyes on him as he bolted out of his room. He pedaled his bicycle as hard as he could, racing straight for the store. Yashio pedaled his cycle like his life depended on it, whipping his eyes around to catch the stalker in the act. But first, he zeroed in on one mission, getting to Sayuki. He bolted to the convenience store and rushed straight up to the clerk, asking if she was okay right away. She insisted she was fine, but he could clearly see the tremor still rattling her. He told her to stay right where she was while he went after that stalker. Sayuki slammed into him to stop him cold, then described the exact person she'd just seen. 10 minutes later, Yashio came back, panting, and said he'd torn through the area, yet he couldn't spot a single person who matched her description. She bowed her head and apologized, admitting she might have slipped up, then couldn't stop wondering what on earth had gone wrong with her. But Yashio leaned in and told her everything was fine, even though he figured it all stemmed from the terrifying ordeal she'd faced just recently. The very next day, as Yashio was heading home from work, Sayuki popped up on his phone and told him their dad would swing by to pick her up. Hearing that hit like a wave of relief, and from that day on, either he or their dad made sure they were waiting for Sayuki at the bus stop. On the way home, Yashio couldn't stop thinking about cracking open * Village of Fate * on his phone. He launched the game, and right away Mullies popped up, asking if everyone wanted to swing by her village the very next day. Yashio couldn't figure out why she dragged them to a ruined village. Then Mullies cut in and explained it. Even after the village burned to the ground, there were still scraps of supplies and food left behind. She figured those things would finally get put to real use, and if the villagers' spirits had any say, they'd be over the moon seeing their belongings put back to work. Gams demanded, "Are you truly okay with this?" And Mullies shot back, "Yes, because we'll avenge your people and that's the right move." Yashio nodded at her logic. Carol shot up with excitement and blurted out that she wanted to come too. Rhodys and Layla stared in confusion, then Carol finally spilled the truth. She was always trapped at home, stuck guarding the house day after day. She hopped on a CHEM and snapped that it wasn't fair. Only CHEM got to go, while admitting she didn't exactly bring much to the table. Gems shot her a reassuring grin and promised they'd be fine, then made sure Carol was coming with them too. Kem objected right away, warning that it was way too dangerous. Dems told them, "We wiped out the enemy, so it's finally safe out there now." Finally, Kem leaned in and demanded a promise from Carol. She'd listened to Gams without a single doubt, and Carol nodded, agreeing on the spot. Kem still hesitated, so Gams leaned in and promised her that Rhodys and Layla would come too, then told her straight up, everybody needed a breather or the stress would crush them into misery. Fresh air would do them all a world of good, and Yashio's smile widened when he saw Gams step up, standing guard over the villagers. Mullies urged them to ditch the road and ride there on horseback. Then he grabbed a wagon and hauled the goods back. Everyone, even Yashio, was grinning at the plan, because now that they had a wagon to haul everything, this trip felt twice as worth it. Yama spotted Yashio glued to a game and shot back, "Is that a brand new one?" Yashio nodded to confirm it, but when he saw the hurt on Yama's face, he snapped, "Something happened today." Yama snapped him back to the game he'd been hooked on, and Yashio's mind finally caught up, demanding to know if this was that wild strategy where you rip enemy territory away with your own playbook. Yama confirmed it with a grim nod. Enemy forces had seized one of his bases. He admitted he'd dumped a fortune into boosting his forces, only for it all to go down the drain, and Yama snapped that he still had a few bases hanging on, but getting half his salary wiped out by the game hurt like hell. Yashio felt his pain and straight up confessed that he, too, had dumped several thousands on microtransactions. While he was playing that game, he finally got it, right down to how it feels. When Yashio finally got home, he fired up the game and checked on his village like it depended on him. The villagers gripped the reins and geared up to ride out on horseback. You spot a river right by the cave, rushing like it's begging for attention. but they were going the long way around, dodging the moment they'd have to cross it. Yashio decided to keep staring at the map, eyes wide, staying ready for anything, because Mully's was a villager now. You can straight up see every stop she's ever hit, like her whole journey is right there in front of you. But even then, he still couldn't get a full look at the entire forbidden forest. He couldn't stop thinking, how enormous was this map anyway? As they rode, Carol teased Gams, grinning because he looked like a knight escorting a princess. Gam grinned, called her his princess, and asked how her ride went. Carol's face lit up as she said it was ridiculously comfortable. But once Kem heard that, jealousy flared up in his chest. Just as they were about to reach the village, Yashio spotted something chilling. People were already waiting there. They didn't look hostile at all, but he couldn't spot a single one of them from where he... Background info, and he couldn't even catch a single word they were saying. You realize it doesn't matter how he tries. Those words won't make sense unless the Bible is right there. It made everyone swear the game's progress was riding on the Bible. Because without it, he couldn't trigger miracles or read the prophecies, unless he was right on top of it. He wrestled with the idea of warning the villagers, but he held back, because what if things got even worse? And more than anything, he had to protect that prophecy. When the villagers finally rolled into their village, they stopped dead. Everything looked wrecked and torn to pieces. Then Gam snapped, telling everyone to stay back. No one was allowed to move past the houses. Mullies and Gams burst ahead, warning them that people were right up ahead. Mullies knocked an arrow with her bow raised, staring at the villagers like, "Why are you here in my village?" Suddenly Mullies clocked the man's face and blurted out, asking if he was okay. He grinned, recognized her right away, and shot back, asking if she was all right. He ordered his guards to slip their weapons away and check on the village's state, making it clear he cared about how bad things had gotten. Seeing Mullies safe washed the relief over him like a wave. He flashed a grin and said he was a traveling peddler, then pushed a deal like, "Sell me anything you've got." And realizing they'd been battered by brutal times, just trying to make it through. Rhodey's talked to the man, then urged him that when they wrapped up they should hit the cave, because if he wanted, Rhodey's could sell him some goods. Yashio couldn't help smiling, soaking in the joy of what he was seeing. He remembered he'd triggered the Bedler visit's miracle 3 days ago. Nothing happened at first, so now he finally got it. Some miracles don't hit instantly. Once the wagon was stacked and ready, the peddler snapped the news to everyone. Chim leaned in and asked her if she'd say a prayer for the people of Mullies' hometown before they finally left. Mullies nodded hard, and right there, side by side, they clasped their hands and prayed. Yashio's chest tightened as he watched everyone bow their heads and pray beside the graves. Then he spotted the villagers coming back and felt his shoulders finally drop, safe and sound. So he bolted into the kitchen, snatched up meat and fruit, and got out fast. When he came back, he raced to the tank to feed the lizard, only to find it gone. He scanned the area, hunting for where it had vanished, and he spotted it sitting on the table. He couldn't believe it. How did that thing slip out of the tank in the first place? Snagged the tank and then, right to the glass, slid in a juicy piece of meat. Meanwhile, Doldod stared at the villagers one by one, clocking every unique talent, and he just couldn't help but call them seriously impressive. While Rhodey's counted the cash, he muttered that the total felt a little too high. Doldod leaned in and said he'd added more, because he knew fate's God would bless them for it, and trust that this will spark real growth for them both. Yashio thought the merchant's generosity was the real deal. Rhodey's then shot them a question, since they were short on hands, who'd be willing to leave and move to Doldod's village. The old one warned that, over the past few years, monsters had wiped out so many villages they'd all started calling it a massacre. It's these people who are hunting for a peaceful place to live. The villagers gawked at the software in pure shock, and Yashio couldn't help wondering if escaping the forbidden forest meant the whole game was over. Still, he chose not to steer them with a prophecy. He'd rather let them blaze their own trail. Rhodey's finally spoke up and declared they were staying in the forest, and he even admitted it might sound downright foolish. But he couldn't let go of one dream, to live on the land guarded by the god of fate. So when Layla, his wife, heard it, she didn't hesitate. She pledged to stand right beside him. Mullies added she couldn't bring herself to leave either. This was the place where her brothers met their end. Everyone decided to stick together deep in the forest, and that choice lit up Yashio's whole heart with joy. Knowing they were finally satisfied with their choice, Doldod leaned in and said he had contacts who'd beg to live there too, because those people had already been thrown out of their own homes. He clung to one hope: everyone would be okay. After the handshake, Doldod swore he'd be back in just a few days, bringing the goods they'd asked for. Then he left in a rush while everyone stood there waving him off, goodbye ringing in the air. Yashio felt pure gratitude swelling in his chest, so he vowed to send the villagers a prophecy. Kim snapped the words out loud. It beckoned those mollusks and promised that every goodbye and every fresh encounter they'd face would forge them even stronger. Everyone lit up the moment the prophecy was spoken, and Yashio felt his heart lift watching their smiles. But then he started thinking about winter creeping closer, and how they'd better get ready. Suddenly he got stuck on one burning question: what on earth would he name his lizard? Then he blurted, "Is Lizardsaurus actually a good name?" The lizard snapped its head back, refusing outright. Yashio then leaned into destiny, because in English, that word basically means believing something bigger is guiding your path. Hearing that, the lizard just nodded, and Yashio broke into a grin as he named it Destiny. Sinking into his chair, Yashio started texting Seikka and flashed her the carved statue Carol had made, and Seikka couldn't stop smiling. Yashio's mind snapped back to 10 years ago, when Seikka snagged a job at a huge company while he was still stuck, hunting work and coming up empty. Rage and humiliation swallowed him, and he cut off all contact, then refused to say a word to her. Heat of irritation still clung to him, and now shame crushed him. Guilt surged as he wondered if someone like him even deserved a chance to talk to her again. Ever since he was a kid, talking to anyone outside his family felt brutally hard for him. When he stared at Gams on his PC screen, he caught something. Sure, Gams didn't exactly talk much, but he still found ways to connect with everyone else, and Yashio immediately wondered if he could steal a lesson from that. Then Carol burst in, asked what Gams was up to, and he told her he was gearing up to go hunting with Mullies. Yashio caught Carol acting just like Shem around Mullies, and jealousy sparked hard in his chest. Gam's visitor left and promised he'd be back in a blink, and that set Yashio thinking. Only total confidence in the blood guys could pull that off, and he couldn't picture himself learning that kind of nerve. Then Yashio stared at Rhodey's and figured, since he was just a regular guy with a wife and kid, he probably handled conversations like a real adult. "Bro, we were cranking through a giant list with Layla just to hand over the dull. He told Layla he was over the moon that they'd finally met, because if they hadn't, he'd have had to trek all the way into town just to shop. Layla stared at the moment, convinced it had to be God's message, that she didn't have to drive herself any harder. Rhodey's finally admitted that watching Gams grind so hard, despite being younger, lit a fire under him, and it drove him crazy knowing he felt completely useless. Yashio totally got why Rhodey's felt that way, then Rhodey's snapped, frustration pouring out as he warned, "If this keeps going like this, Carol could end up getting swept off her feet by some dangerously tempting Gams." Yashio finally clocked Rhodey's real worry, and Layla steadied him. She told him it was probably already too late and that it really wasn't a big deal. Yashio couldn't shake the feeling that he was kind of useless himself. He couldn't stop thinking about whether to go ask Sayuki for advice. Then she'd probably just burst out laughing at him. Yashio even started to think about pinging one of his online gaming buddies, the king of chick magnetism, for advice. But then it hit him, he'd totally forgotten to deliver the prophecies. With his thoughts racing and no clue what to say, he finally decided to ask. Rushed into the village and demanded their advice. He shot them a prophecy, saying one of his young male followers was falling apart over love, and he begged them for advice on how human relationships really work. When the villagers read it, they stared in total disbelief. Like, was their god really asking them about love? When Yashio saw their faces, dread clawed at him, like he'd just made the wrong move. What kind of god stops mid-divine plan to ask his own followers, "So, who are we loving?" It felt like his dignity got ripped away, until Carol finally spoke up. He joked that maybe God was taking requests for love advice, and Cam snapped, "Stop, don't pester our God with that stuff." Layla quickly snapped at them, reminding them not to brush off their God's request. She said this was their rare shot to finally repay him for all his support, and Malice admitted she honestly didn't get romance at all. Layla leaned in and pressed Kem for the details, and Kem explained that the man clearly had a childhood friend tied to him. With someone he didn't just know, he had a real bond, way more than friends, but not quite lovers. Once Kemp laid out the whole mess to everyone, Carol couldn't sit still. She practically begged him to go on a date. Yashio blinked at how boldly she said it, then couldn't shake the feeling that everything was rushing way too fast. Kem nodded and said, "Don't jump into the heavy talk yet. Let's kick back, enjoy each other's company, and that'll melt the distance between us." Layla laughed and confessed that she and Rhodey's had a date before they ever tied the knot. Then Rhodey's immediately turned beet red and begged her, "Don't say that stuff in front of everyone." Then Kem leaned in and grilled Malice for her take, and Malice told him this. In her world, love gets built the slow way, through careful steps, and they don't make wild, bold moves on each other. So she finally admitted, maybe I'm not the best person to be giving advice. As Yashio daydreamed about dating, he remembered stepping out with that girl a few times, but he still couldn't help wondering what real couples did on their dates. Then Kem chimed in, saying she'd be happiest with someone who could stay close to her and genuinely stick around. Lelates fired off another comment, and it hit him so hard he practically melted, blushing like crazy all over again. After hearing every word of their chat, Yashio got fired up by the villagers, wild enthusiasm. But he still knew a date wasn't something he could handle just yet. Still, he couldn't stop thinking, what message was he even supposed to send? After wrestling with it, he finally shot her a message asking her to hang out. As he waited for her answer, Yashio spotted Destiny, his pet, huddled close trying to calm him down. Then, after the silence stretching on, he finally got a reply. She said it was a weekday and she was buried in work, then told him to try again another time. Yashio just spiraled, frustrated at himself for lacking the social experience, and disappointment crushed him. But then it hit him, she didn't shut his invitation down at all. To calm himself, he told his own mind, give it one more try, next time you'll do your best. Yashio clocked Layla, Carol, and Kem huddled together, trading whispers about the prophecy, and the worry on their faces told him something big was coming. You could practically see the curiosity burning in their eyes, begging to know what happened next. And he couldn't stop himself from thinking, should I tell them what happens? He fired off one more prophecy, thanking them for their help and making it crystal clear how grateful he was. The women lit up reading his message, and Osho caught it instantly. They felt just like his mom and Seikka, the type who'd practically burst with excitement over TV dramas. He figured the villagers had been so busy clawing their way through survival that fun and games just never had a chance, until this moment. Watching them light up made his heart soar, and even with that tiny flush of embarrassment, he still figured, maybe I'll sneak my love life into the conversation every now and then. The next day, Yashio fired off yet another prophecy, bragging to the villagers that his believer had pulled off the outing successfully. But he had no idea where to lead her next. The villagers nearly burst with excitement reading it, then started buzzing about where they could hold it, maybe the theater or somewhere just like it. Carol blurted out that she couldn't wait to watch a play, and Melissa nodded, saying it was actually a pretty great idea. Yashio suddenly realized he'd never set foot in a theater before, so he decided a movie might be the next best thing. Leaning at the window, he felt the crushing weight of one thing. If he didn't follow the villagers' advice, he'd shatter their trust. He decided he'd tell them the final verdict, success or failure, no matter what. Then he hit up Seikka and demanded to know if she was free. She said it was super rare to hear from him, then told him she was completely free. He asked when her next day off was. Then boom, the very next day Yashio stood before the villagers and delivered a prophecy, making it crystal clear that her advice had truly worked. Then he thanked them for their help, told them the consultation was officially done, and admitted, half between relief and regret, that it sucked seeing everyone's hype crash, but life had to snap back to normal. Yashio dreamed that one day the village would finally grow safe, and he'd be able to see his prophecies turn fear into peace, and give everyone something joyful to look forward to. With that thought burning in his head, he knew he had to leave and hustle for cash, support the village, and pay for his date that was coming up. So he burst out of his room, itching to take action. After he clocked out, Yashio tore home and immediately checked his phone. Seikka sent him a message. She'd be stuck working overtime and would roll in late, so she asked him to pick her up from the bus stop. With a grin, he told her he'd think it over, because first, he wanted to slip to the convenience store and grab himself some candy and juice. So he tore off to find his backpack, panic spiking with every step. After he hunted around for a while, he finally nailed it. Destiny, his lizard, watched every move like it knew this moment mattered. Yashio rushed to the convenience store, and right there, a boy caught his eye. He couldn't stop wondering if this was the same stalker who used to haunt Seikka back then. Old memories slammed back into his head, and he couldn't help but think it actually end up being the same guy, especially because this was his asterisk hometown, so everything hit even harder. Yashio stood there nursing a cup of hot coffee while the boy stared at his phone, and the moment he saw him again, right before his sister was about to head home, unease crashed into him like it wasn't a coincidence. He thought about calling the police, but he knew they'd only move once something real happened, an actual incident. Stuck on what to do, he suddenly realized Seikka was about to arrive any minute. Yashio vowed to wipe the fear from her heart, so He swallowed his fear, pumped himself up, and marched right up to the boy to handle the mess. Yashio clocked 2 other people standing right nearby. He wrestled with the decision to shout, knowing one call would instantly grab their attention. So he leaned in and demanded the boy's name. "Are you Yashinaga?" The boy nodded, then leaned in and demanded to know who was talking. Yashio snapped him back to the situation, Sayuki, his little sister. When Yashinaga finally clocked who he was, he leaned in and blurted, "So you're Sayuki's older brother." Yashio grinned and nodded, like he'd just nailed the truth. Yashinaga dropped his head right away, bowing hard, and apologized for every bit of trouble he'd caused them back then. Yashio leaned in and promised it was finally over, then admitted he might have been way too harsh back then. He barked at Yashinaga, "Lift your head." Yashio thought about snapping back at him, but Sayuki's safety came first. So he demanded to know why Yashinaga was still out at this hour, and Yashinaga just shrugged it off, saying the nearest convenience store was right there and he'd stopped after work. Yashio studied him and thought, if I didn't know what happened before, Yashinaga would look like nothing more than a polite, normal young guy. And that thought hit hard, because lots of people would have blamed Yashio instead for being the suspicious one. Yashio snapped at Yashinaga to stay far away from his sister, and Yashinaga finally confessed that his feelings for her had completely spun out of control, leading straight into the chaos he caused. Suddenly, Yashio's head snapped as he demanded answers. Why the heck was he still stalking her even after the restraining order? And realizing it was the second time their paths had crossed, replaying the moment Yashinaga bolted and vanished. When he noticed it that night, even though it was just a bluff, Yashinaga bought it, and with fury in his chest, he demanded to know whether he'd been found down. Frustration erupted, and Yashinaga screamed that he was in the exact same mess as Yashio after being tossed into all of this. Rage surged through him as he flung his coffee can onto the ground. Yashio and Sayuki, that's who he pointed the blame at, swearing they'd wrecked his whole life. Yashio snapped to it. Yashinaga wasn't thinking straight, and he yelled at him to keep his distance from his sister. Yashinaga sneered at him, calling him scared, then accused Yashio of trying to ruin his sister's free love. And Yashio fired back that if Yashinaga wanted to play like that, he already had other plans. Yashinaga sneered, daring Yashio to call the police, and bragged that he still had plenty of buddies from reform school. Yashio then demanded, "Why are you stalking Sayuki?" And Yashinaga answered, voice trembling with truth, he loved her for real. But he chickened out and never dared to talk to her. Locked up, he kept replaying what to do next. Then the hours warped in his head, twisting every thought until his obsession turned sharp, mean, and dangerous. Yashinaga let the cat out of the bag. He didn't just want to hurt her anymore, he wanted Sayuki to break down and beg for mercy. When Yashio heard it, his hesitation hit him like a gut punch. Panic seized him as he wondered, should he bolt and vanish or just walk away for good? He clenched his fist, swallowing every regret he had left, no more backing down. He'd stop this guy no matter what it cost, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Rage burned in his chest as he strode straight toward Yashinaga. Yashinaga taunted him like, "Go on, try to hit me," daring him to throw a punch and risk getting slapped with an assault charge. Yashio never meant to hit him. This whole thing was already rolling on his phone, and then Yashinaga slapped the word fate on it like that made it happen. Since Sayuki's older brother showed up on the very day of his scheme, he grabbed him right alongside Sayuki and dragged him off too. Baffled by what Yashinaga was blabbering, Yashio suddenly looked up and realized more and more people had closed in around him. Caught on camera, every second of the entire scene is right there. Yashinaga smirked and declared they'd stream it live, and it would rake in the best content. Yashio suddenly realized the odds were brutal. He was outnumbered. But he didn't panic, he snapped into action. He couldn't stop replaying how Gams and the rest of the villagers had battered those monsters back, one brutal fight at a time. They were only human, but he knew he couldn't dodge them, no matter what it took. One of them leaned in and blurted out that Yashio looked absolutely shredded. Yashio figured all that muscle training finally made him look strong enough. He snapped at Yashinaga, snarling that if he even tried something, he wouldn't walk away unscathed. Yet Yashinaga only smirked back, brushing it off like it meant nothing, because his friends were wrapped up in a violent crew and would handle everything. As Yashio scanned the room, he spotted it. One knife, a stun gun, and a police baton sitting right there like trouble waiting to explode. His heart slammed in his chest as 2 more boys rushed in. Now it was 5 against 1. He gawked, stunned, watching them grin right in his face, and Yashinaga even hissed that they should break his legs first so he couldn't run, but then out of nowhere, one of the boys started coughing hard, fighting for every breath. In the blink of an eye, Every single one of them started choking and coughing at full volume. He crumpled to the floor, knocked out cold. Yashinaga reeled in shock and demanded, "What the hell did you do, Yashio?" Yashio, just as baffled, snapped at him, "Take them to the hospital or watch them die." But before Yashinaga could even react, he too crumpled to the ground and passed out. Yashio stared at them all like that and checked the situation, to confirm they weren't bluffing, and then it hit them. This wasn't some act, it was a genuinely abnormal situation. Panicking, he bolted straight to the convenience store and ordered them to call the police and an ambulance, like seconds mattered, explaining how 5 men had crumpled to the ground outside. When Sayuki finally stumbled up to the bus stop, she spotted an ambulance idling right nearby. She clocked her brother, Yashio, and watched a police officer question him right in front of her. The officer grilled Yashio, asking if he'd slipped to the convenience store for help, and Yashio nodded, confirming it. Then they pressed him about how he was tied to that crew, and Yashio froze, stammering that their connection was messy, tangled, and way too complicated to explain fast. The cops started rifling through his stuff, and right when they did, Sayuki slipped up and demanded to know what in the world had happened. Yashio told her the man had collapsed, maybe from food poisoning, and then he eased her nerves, saying he'd already called their dad to pick her up. But when the officer reached into Yashio's backpack, his eyes went wide. There was a lizard inside. Yashio leaned in and said it was his pet lizard, Destiny, the little guy he raised right at home. The officer looked totally baffled and said they'd have to grill Yashio with more questions at the police station. Then Yashio calmly told him, "I'll give the lizard to my sister first." He shoved Destiny into Sayuki's hands, then leaned in and reassured her, "Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Just wait, I'll spill everything later." Yashio barged into the police station, got grilled all the way through the night, told them everything, and even handed over the recording, which, thank God, screeched to a halt right before Heathrow, then Yashinaga. Fresh out the door, he burst into the morning like a weight had been lifted. Sunlight hit his face and relief flooded him, and there stood his dad and Sayuki, already waiting. He asked with worry in his voice if you were really okay. Sayuki asked, "Are you skipping work?" Then she quickly confessed they were worried sick, so they rushed over and picked him up. She blurted out that she was sorry for pulling him into that mess, but he snapped back that it wasn't her fault. He'd do it again for her. Their dad urged them to head home, insisting this wasn't the spot for a long talk right outside the police station. In the quiet of the car, Yashio fidgeted and fretted over how he was going to explain it all. With a final gulp of courage, he blurted out the truth to them. The guy caught in the middle was Yashinaga. Sayuki stalker. Sayuki gasped in shock and yelled that he hadn't changed one bit. If anything, he'd gotten even worse, while their dad stayed calm, telling her to breathe and relax, and Yashio told him he'd talk to him about it later. Yashio's chest tightened the moment he heard his dad's tone, and he instantly felt that crushing disappointment. But he couldn't stop wondering what happened to him, and then he blurted, "You keep." If the guys hadn't crumpled to the ground. While Yashio drifted into his thoughts, his dad leaned in and told him, "I saw you do your best to protect your sister, and I'm damn proud of you." When Yashio heard this, he snapped into action and powered up. His dad, usually the yeah right kind, laughed and joked that even as an atheist, he'd still find something to believe in. He couldn't deny it. Somehow, it felt like a blessing when those guys got paralyzed from food poisoning. Yashio figured they were chalking this up to food poisoning for the time being, because those men had eaten oysters to celebrate, and something in them could have been contaminated. But the way they were itching and choking made Yashio swear it felt like poison gas. Something hit them hard, but it never even fazed him. They finally made it home, and his mom shot him a sharp look, asking fast if he was really okay. Yashio leaned in and told her to breathe, that everything was fine and she had nothing to fear. Then he headed to his room and froze for a second when he saw Destiny, his pet lizard, already sitting there. He couldn't shake the feeling that Destiny might finally be about to responsible for what happened to those guys, but he snapped the idea out of his mind as impossible. Burned out and barely holding on, he dropped into his chair at the PC and went to check on the village. He swapped into a fresh shirt, then watched the villagers toil like their lives depended on it. He smirked to himself, like he'd just unlocked a secret only he could see. He swallowed his gratitude like a promise, because he knew their support had lit a fire in his chest, the courage he needed to guard his little sister. With everything that had hit him, Yashio felt completely wiped out, and even though it was morning, he thought, just sleep. So he hit the bed, closed his eyes, and zoned out fast. In the afternoon, Yashio jolted awake as his mom's voice blared from the other room. He asked if he was awake, then hurried down the stairs, wondering if another parcel had arrived, until his mother told him a guest was coming. And she already had snacks lined up in the guest room. The second he walked in, he froze. Seikka was sitting there right next to Sayuki. With a jolt, he stared at Seikka's empty side of the world and wondered if she'd skipped work. Seikka told her that Sayuki had spilled what happened, and the worry hit her so hard she yanked herself out of work and took the day off. Yashio plopped down and shot them a calm smile, swearing he was totally fine. It had been ages since the three of them had finally huddled together like this. And in that moment he felt it, pure relief. Yashio leaned in and demanded to know what Seikka truly understood about the incident, and she told him, straight up, that Sayuki had filled her in on the entire story. How they plotted to snatch her. Then Yashio burst in at the worst moment and saved the day. Sayuki clocked the sour mood on his face and pressed, "What's wrong?" Even though that stalker mess was finally settled, he leaned in and reassured her, then admitted the truth. Those guys were sitting in the hospital right now, and with their smartphones full of messages spelling out their plans, they could be arrested any minute. When she heard that, relief hit Sayuki like a wave, and she blurted out how happy she was. Then Yashio leaned in and warned her to run straight back to him the moment anything like it happens again. She flushed bright, whispered her thanks, and even called him Big Brother. Seikka flashed a grin and said, "Looks like we're finally clicking." Sayuki and Yashio locked eyes and agreed on the spot. Suddenly, Seikka grabbed Yashio's attention and asked if they could finally be friends again. He couldn't help it. His mind reeled with one painful thought. He dodged her on purpose 10 years ago. He figured life wouldn't play fair. He had to apologize for brushing her off back then. If she was willing, he'd be thrilled to rekindle their friendship, right back to how it was in the good old days. She grinned and said, she looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you." Yashio finally confessed that he was sure she hated him down to her bones. Seikka leaned in and told him, "There's no chance I could ever hate you." Then she spilled the truth. She'd left home because of a job transfer, and even when she finally got a chance to visit, she'd vanish again for work, chasing business trips like they owned her life. Right when she opened her mouth again, she froze mid-sentence. Realized it felt a little awkward with Sayuki sitting right there too. She blurted out a new topic to dodge the moment, then spotted a lizard creeping behind Yashio and let out a terrified scream. Yashio suddenly felt it, like destiny had its hands on his fate, and he couldn't help wondering what it all meant. Sayuki stared at how it slipped free again, panic buzzing. Then he shoved it into her hands like, "Can you hold it this time?" Meanwhile, a jittery Seikka practically pleaded with him to keep it far away. She's finally going to realize she's been hating reptiles and amphibians since she was a kid. Yashio lets a grin creep in as he accidentally scoots the lizard closer to her. Made her shriek at the top of her lungs and tell him to stop acting like a child. Remind him she's been furious about that for years. Seeing Sayuki break into laughter, Yashio shot back with a quick apology, grinning like he'd just gotten away with something. Meanwhile, Yama was in a foul mood, rage tapping through his video game like it had personally betrayed him. Frustration surged when a surprise raid wiped out one of his bases. He couldn't stop replaying every second and every coin he'd poured into that game, and it just spiraled from there, that only poured gasoline on his fury. He jabbed at his phone screen and snapped, muttering through clenched teeth. In the next scene, Doldol stormed back into the village. "Hey everyone," he stepped up, flashed a grin, and announced that he had delivered everything they asked for, and even hauled in a crowd of folks itching to move in next. Meet Khan and Ran, the panda race duo, bringing the trouble with every step. At first, Yashio was totally thrown off, wondering how everyone would react, but then, boom, warm smiles all around, and Carol practically burst with excitement, calling them so fluffy. The old one, again and again, told them that Ken and Ran could carve lumber, shape stones, and work metals with real skill. Ken and Ron said they'd either been living in caves with dwarves or grinding these skills from the start. Either way, Yashio lit up, proud as he watched their crafting abilities, and thought this could kickstart the village's growth in a huge way. When they saw it, their hearts finally calmed. Just looking at it felt like relief. A few days later, the village had squeezed itself so tight into the caves that there was literally no space left. They tore out the old limits and expanded the fence area. Cannon ran up and built a hut for themselves, and now were teaming up with roadies and gams to slam together a food storehouse. Yashio also clocked it. Cannon Ran were deadly with spears, and they'd spar like clockwork just to train and sharpen their skills. Then he spotted Mullies out in the field, harvesting herbs while the girls worked right beside her. Soon, Yashio yanked open his drawer and stared down at the drug the village had handed him. I don't know if it was safe, but I sure as hell tried anyway. He tossed the idea aside and kept it close, like a sweet little good luck charm. Even with his worries gnawing at him, he couldn't deny it. Seeing the villagers ready themselves made his heart lift for what came next, even if the evil god's temptation was closing in. He told himself that if he powered through his work, he could rake in enough points to summon another golem, and the thought lit him up with pure excitement as he counted down the days to the end of the month. The very next day, once Yashio's crew clocked out of the morning shift, their boss leaned in and told them, "After lunch, we're rolling to the next site." After a quick breather in the van, they'd jump back in and roll straight into their night shift. Just hearing it drained every ounce of energy out of me. With the year ending fast, the requests piled up, and on some days they started rolling in right from the morning. And he didn't stop until it hit 4 in the morning. His body screamed that it was done, but he refused to quit. Even as the urge to ditch work kept swelling, it got harder and harder to ignore. When Yashio finally stumbled through the door, his mother was. They greeted him with smiles and straight up asked if he was skipping dinner. He said he was wiped out and was heading straight to bed. The moment he finally made it into his room, he crumpled onto his bed like all the fight drained out of him, thinking about how brutal it must feel for people who grind every single day, and why they deserve way more love and recognition. He crashed into sleep in a blink, then jolted awake the very next morning. Still clinging to his bed, he refused to. Peering through his screen, he stole a quick glance at the village. He clocked Carol sliding him her favorite fruit right there in front of him, and begging that everyone survives the evil god's temptation. When he spotted her, Yashio snapped into action. He shot upright like, "Okay, it's time to gear up and get ready." Yashio huffed back to work, and mid-shift, he heard someone sneaking up right behind him. He tried to talk back, and yeah, he wasn't locked in on his job at all. He shot out an apology, spun around, and froze when he realized his boss wasn't addressing him. He was talking straight to Yama. The boss asked what was going on and said Yama had been looking worn out lately. Then he told him to take the day off if he felt sick. Yama shook his head and swore he was fine, claiming it was only sleep deprivation and that he needed the money. Lately, Yashio couldn't shake the feeling that Yama had been acting way too strange. He used to light up during breaks, but lately he's been stuck to his video game 24/7, barely chatting with anyone. During the break, Yashio was glued to a game on. Then Yama slid in from behind and said it looked like he was completely hooked. Yashio flashed a grin and told everyone he was just fooling around a little in his free time. As Yama walked past, he tossed out that the game he was racking up chaos, shattering enemy bases and beefing up his monster army by paying to seize even more control. Yama leaned in and confessed that in the game he had to play the villain, burning villages down to the ground, crowned like an evil god and hunting a single mission, wipe humanity off the map. Yashio's jaw dropped at that. Yama kept going. He told me the game had a point system where beating enemies racked up scores, and dumping more cash into it made those points skyrocket even faster. He confessed that nearly all his hard-earned wages were vanishing into in-game purchases, which made his recent weird behavior click, and Yashio couldn't stop thinking, did the Village of Fate have a way to let someone play as the evil god? He felt other players around, and it only got worse after he spotted Mullies with that mysterious book. Meanwhile, Yama kept the conversation going about his game, promising it would shower players with rewards. He told me that every time he wiped out enemy bases, he racked up a mountain of points, then cashed them in for real money. He told me he once pulled in a mind-blowing 5 million yen from it. Yashio froze in shock as Yama kept going, telling him he'd taken that money to wipe out the debt his father left behind before vanishing. Yama even quit high school just to work and knock down his debt, and bitterness burned as he raged that his teen years, and the life right after, were thrown away. To settle a debt he never had any power to influence. Then Yama grinned like he couldn't believe it. Finally, he'd snagged a temporary paycheck through the game. He crushed most of the debt by playing his way through it. Yashio just stood there, stunned and confused, trying to figure out why Yama dropped all this on him out of nowhere. Yama locked eyes with Yoshi and growled, right there in front of the dual-wielding swordsman, the one with scars etched across his face, praying Yashio would finally get it. In that instant, Yashio finally clocked it. Yama wasn't talking about anything normal. He was talking about gams, and that realization snapped into place like a punch, because Yama was the village's evil god of fate. They'd somehow slipped back into playing again without even realizing it. They'd been clashing like this the entire time. And now, if even one of them slipped up and lost, their whole game would be done for good. As Yama stormed off, Yashio couldn't stop himself from Was Yama spilling that story just to send him a clear message? Quit the game already. And then it hit him. Maybe this game was Yama's lifeline, the one spark of hope she clung to when things got brutally hard. And for him, it hit the exact same way. The moment he started playing *** Village of Fate ***, his whole life flipped on its head. He finally started turning things around, making real strides both in his work and in his personal life. And he'd forged a bond with the villagers he'd grown to genuinely care about, because the game had changed his life so much that it still hit him in the chest when he thought about it. Yashio loved his villagers so fiercely that there was no way he could stand by and watch them die. He vowed to strike back at Yamaha no matter what it took. On December 30th, the boss grabbed Yashio's shoulder, thanked him for all the hard work, and made it clear he wanted them to team up again when the new year rolled in. Everyone flash a bright grin and trade those cheerful hellos right now. Except for Yama, who stays silent. Once they dumped Yashio off, hope flared in him that everyone could somehow get along later. Because tomorrow was the evil god's temptation, and even if he didn't want to clash with Yama, he knew deep down he'd have to fight. When he finally burst through the door, he remembered. His whole family had left to go visit his grandfather. Suddenly, a voice rang out, welcoming him back like it had never lost him. Thoroughly baffled, he stumbled into the kitchen and caught Seikka cooking up something hot and alive. Smiling sweetly, she told him the food would be ready in a moment. He couldn't wrap his head around why she was there. Seikka told him it was because his mom asked her to watch over him while they were gone. She asked, "Aren't you hungry?" And he grinned like, "I'm starving." He silently bowed his head, thanking his mom for bailing him out. Suddenly, he realized Destiny had shown up too. He couldn't believe it got out again, so he snatched it up and started talking to it right away. Seikka didn't even realize he was talking to Destiny until it hit him, and then he demanded, "What's wrong?" He waved it off and said, "It's nothing," then slid into the real deal with Destiny, only one condition. The thing stays in his room because Seikka hates lizards, and he'll feed it double the food it normally gets. Then they slid into their seats at the table and dug in for a full-on meal. Seikka quizzed him about the food, and he lit up and told her it was absolutely delicious. Then he begged her to teach his little sister how to cook, and she shot back that she'd been honing her own skills and even coming by to take lessons too. Yashio nearly choked on his own breath when he heard it, because he had absolutely no clue about any of it. She leaned in and asked if she could drive him tomorrow, and he told her he'd be grateful, but reminded her she wasn't obligated to do anything. If it wouldn't cost him too much time, he'd really appreciate it. Then she smiled and said she had plenty of free time. He leaned in and asked them if they could chow down on soba noodles for New Year's Eve. He nodded in agreement, but his mind raced, because right around the corner, that evil god's temptation was about to hit, and he couldn't help wondering if he even had the right to eat in peace. On December 31st, the long-awaited day finally slammed into existence. He was locked on his PC, staring at a screen that showed a face twisted with pure stress. His villagers, he asked Destiny, straight to the point, if they could make it through this. At 1 p.m., Mullies burst into the village and warned them. 5 black dogs and 5 ferocious boars were barreling their way in. Yashio's eyes snapped to a notification, proof that the evil god's temptation had just kicked off. Monsters came barreling toward the village, and Mullies raised her bow. She loosed an arrow and struck one of the dogs, catching it. They scattered in terror as her bow rained down power, turning it into an uphill battle to defend the village. Then bam, monsters dropped straight into the pits like they'd been waiting for this moment, and Yashio's heart raced, because it finally felt like his plan was clicking into place. Last week, during his prophecy, he dropped the idea to set up a deadly pitfall. He clocked the boar's one-track charge right into the front and watched the monsters tumble straight into the pit. As the dogs lunged and thrashed, trying to vault the fence, Gems with Pan and Ren riding shotgun burst into action. He finally brought one of the dogs down. Seeing that everyone could fight now, Yashio finally exhaled, because this was nothing like before when only Gams had the power to step in. After he mowed down the first wave of monsters, Gams shouted for everyone to reset the traps and set the pitfalls all over again. Yashio watched them carry out his orders, and a chill hit him. Maybe these monsters wouldn't bite the bait twice with the pits. He even wondered if Yama could bark orders and make his monsters obey. Staring out the window, he swore the monsters were only getting worse as night crept in, so he had to save every last bit of stamina for the evening. Then out of nowhere, the second and third monster waves surged in, and they finally fought back and shut them down for good. Kem shoved a bottle of water into the group's hands, and as soon as they reached for Otis leaned in and asked if he could take over the lookout shift, and Yashio nodded like everything was running perfectly. And with that reserve golem still sitting in his pocket, he was convinced he'd crush every problem before Seikka could stop buying the night. Yashio couldn't stop wondering what Yama was up to, and the urge to call him kept clawing at his thoughts. Suddenly, he realized they weren't working together at all. They were fighting each other. So Yama probably thought he was poking the bear just to set him off. After an entire hour crawled by with 0 attacks, Yashio couldn't help but wonder, was the danger finally done for good? He figured they'd already quit, but Yamamoto still left him craving more. Suddenly, he sensed someone was downstairs. Believing it was Seikka, he shot down to the kitchen. He looked everywhere, but there was nobody in sight. He clocked a burglar creeping around the place. Yashio was seconds away from calling the police when he clocked the burglar's hair instantly. He froze in disbelief when he realized it was really Yamamoto. A few months back, Yama cracked open a mystery letter and couldn't stop wondering what it was hiding. As he read the words, his stomach dropped. Turns out this was about a game called *Destruction Impulse***, and somehow he'd been picked as a ** beta tester ***. He couldn't stop wondering if he'd really hit apply or not. Then he scanned the code, downloaded the game, and his jaw dropped. The graphics hit hard, and he was sure they'd blow up into a hit in no time. Yama couldn't resist digging into the game's mechanics, and it's what let him. He cranked out monsters and slammed them into enemy bases. But when he realized he couldn't control them, he snapped and quit the game. Out of nowhere, the house's owner burst outside and screamed Yama's name. Yama yanked the door open and told him, "Calm down right now." The man snapped, demanding to know exactly when Yama would finally cough up the rent and clear the debt. Yama asked if he could pay straight from his phone. The man shrugged and nodded, and Yama hurriedly handed over every cent he owed. Still, the man couldn't help asking where Yama found all that money, but Yama just waved it off and said it didn't matter. Then he promised he'd never miss a payment again. The man turned and strode off, leaving Yama hanging behind him, swearing this gamer actually funneled real cash into his account. He ditched the game for a bit, but the moment he realized those points he earned from raiding tiny enemy bases could be cashed out for real money, he got hooked and played it harder and harder. It felt like a dream finally coming true. He could actually earn money just by playing a game, and that hope burned bright as he swore he'd wipe out every last debt with it. He was stuck working in the store, right beside his boss. A fresh-faced newcomer named Yashio just showed up. When Yama locked eyes with him, he instantly noticed Yashio's seriously impressive physique. But his face had gone sickly pale, like his life was draining out with every breath. Yama could tell Yashio was fired up for the task, until the moment the job started. Pretty intense. I figured he'd bail real soon. Then it hit him, Yashio was throwing himself into the work, answering like a pro, and that made Yama's mood light up fast, grateful he'd landed a great junior. Later, back home, Yama was locked in on his game when the last evil god's temptation suddenly threw him into trouble. Or his monsters got wiped out by those wooden men. He stared in disbelief at how brutal it was, and instantly thought, "Man, I should have brought the red Cyclops." The next day, Yama and Yashio were hashing it out during their break when the moment hit. Yama found out Yashio was a hardcore gamer, and right then he figured, we could totally be friends. When Yama finally stumbled back home, his whole base was wrecked, and even his Cyclops was dead. Spotting the swordsman standing there with his blade, he finally clicked. This was the same guy who'd pulled it off. Rage surged through Yama's chest when he realized this wasn't random. It was Yashio's counterattack, the same guy who'd hit his cave just recently. Later that day, on the walk home, Yashio sat there and was glued to his phone, waving his thumbs over his mobile game. Yama couldn't help but wonder what kind of game it was when he suddenly spotted a scarred man and thrust out his hand, and his gut dropped when he realized this was the same game. Yashio was standing on the other side. Yama leaned in and asked Yashio if this was a brand new game, then couldn't help wondering if Yashio had finally noticed him playing, and secretly smirked at him behind a fake smile at work. Yama's rage kept climbing day by day, and once the event was close, he finally decided to confront Yashio about it. While the event raged on, Yama shoved himself into the game, thinking, "This is my moment. I'm flipping the script and nobody's stopping me." Suddenly, his monsters stumbled into a groove, and he felt it. Rage surged as he stared at just how unstoppable Yashio's base really was. He realized it had gotten way better, and he'd totally wasted the time. He'd wasted so much time stressing and puffing cigarettes, and it crushed him to realize he might never break defenses that smart. He was ready to burn his cash to instantly supercharge his forces, until it hit him. Yashio was still holding that wooden man in reserve. Yama sat there, stuck in his own head, wondering what he should do next. Suddenly it hit him. What if Yashio couldn't play at all for a while? He fought to steady his breath, realizing that if he kept acting like this, it would have crushed every single thing he fought for his entire life. He refused to give up, because when night finally closed in, it would supercharge his monsters and make victory feel real. He stared at his empty cigarette pack, then snapped to his feet and headed to the store to grab something and cool off. The moment he cracked the door open, a strange man stepped in and demanded to know, did he believe in God? Yama shoved him off and told him to get out, claiming he was slammed and couldn't spare a minute. Eyeballing the guy's look, Yama called out that it didn't feel like they'd ever grown up under a religious upbringing. The man flashed a smirk and said he truly believed in God, but only the ones with evil in their hearts. He flicked his hand right in front of Yama's face, brushing him off so hard that Yama froze in utter shock. Right now, Yashio grabbed the burglar by the moment and demanded, "If you're here." The burglar yanked off his mask and revealed exactly who he was, and he couldn't stop wondering how the guy had even spotted him. Yashio snapped, asking Yama why he was there, then ordered him to drop the crowbar, while Yama smirked back that Yashio already knew exactly what he was doing. Yashio snapped that he was trying to mess with his game, and Yama shot back that if he didn't step up, he'd make things rough for him. Yashio told him to stop waiting and finally face the evil god's temptation, because that was a crime, and he needed to stop acting so foolish right now. Yama leaned in, wondering if a casual question would make Yashio stop playing, but Yashio just snapped back, "I can't." Hearing that, Yamasmerk shrugged and swore he'd only gone to a coworker's place to hang out, after downing drinks, claiming the crowbar was something he'd just stumbled on in Yashio's garden shed. Yashio told him that excuse was dead on arrival, and Yama just laughed, then fired back, asking who in society would ever swallow Yashio's story. Yashio's face crumpled as those words landed like a punch, and he finally understood how alone he'd been for 10 straight years, while Yama, all this time, had been out working, talking, and living. So unbelievable that nobody would ever buy Yashio's side of the story. Yama told him, "I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to land myself with a criminal record," and pushed Yashio to just give up and take the loss, then sweetened the deal by offering to split half the raid money so they'd both walk away rich. Yashio wrestled with the decision. If he didn't stand against Yama, he'd pocket the cash. And maybe, just maybe, they could go right back to being friends like it used to be. Yashio stared at Yamamoto with a serious look and started wondering just how much that game had swallowed up his life. Then pushed the question, did he really feel guilty about killing the villagers in it? He couldn't help blurting out, does Yama ever pause before erasing characters that look so real it feels like they breathe? Yamamoto blurted, yeah, it feels real, but it's still just a game to me. And then Yashio shot back, furious, not ready to accept it. He asked if Yama ever felt real pain when he saw news of civilians getting killed in real conflicts. And even then, Yashio usually didn't let it hit him hard. He couldn't shake the feeling that the game NPCs weren't just coded. They were trying as hard to live like real people, turning them into something bigger than fiction in his eyes. Yashio leaned in and demanded, "So you'll rethink what you did." But Yama's eyes went wide, pure shock hit him like lightning. Yama warned that Yashio was acting like a fool, because he'd been suffering just the same. Born into a wrecked family, he threw in the towel on high school and walked away. He snapped, demanding to know if Yashio even understood the value of money, pointing out that Yashio probably never even stopped to think how much his family had forked over to keep him going for a full year. Yama's frustration hit the roof, and he demanded it, if Yashio had ever truly gotten that. Hearing it all, Yashio's chest tightened, as he finally realized he'd been blaming his misfortune on everyone and everything around him instead of taking responsibility. Now he finally understood. He'd never truly realized just how much luck and blessings were riding with him, and all he could do was drown in excuses, one after another. Yama, still fuming, snapped at Yashio. Someone like him could never rise without an education or any standout gift in school. This game was his only shot, his do-or-die moment. He pointed out just how crushing life can feel when you never make it to a top university. Yashio just soaks in every word Yama throws at him, but he stays deadly silent. He couldn't even speak. Then, in one crushing second, his whole life ripped through his mind. And then he clenched his fists hard as tears spilled down his face. Yama, stunned, blurted out, "Why are you crying?" saying that he should be the one breaking down and crying. With tears streaming down his face, Yashio told Yama, "You're incredible." But Yama couldn't shake the feeling he was just being mocked. Yashio snapped that it wasn't true, then admitted the brutal truth. He never once saw how blessed he was, even as he burned away the last 10 years doing absolutely nothing. He finally admitted he'd been a weight on too many shoulders, and regret crushed him for not finding the guts to change sooner. Yama stormed out in a loud blur, brushing it off like it was nothing but cheap pity. Then Yashio whipped out his phone and showed him the screen, pointing out how the finals stayed. The evil god's temptation finally kicked in. When the sheer, unstoppable force hit him, a wave of monsters barrels in toward the village. Gams and the villagers froze in pure shock. And terrified, with a smug grin, Yama bragged to Yashio that he'd burned through every last yen and unleashed all his troops. Because if he couldn't wipe out Yashio's village, he'd be finished for good. Yashio lunged for his phone, but Yama swung the crowbar up right near him, warning him to stay perfectly still. Yashio's mind raced with one burning question: how could he save his villagers? Then Seikka burst in, caught the chaos, and fired back. Did any of your friends show up? Once she heard the loud voices blasting through the air. Yashio barked at her, screaming for her to stay back. When Seikka burst into the room and locked eyes with Yamamoto, her breath caught. She seriously thought he was a burglar. Yama's rage surged, and he swung the crowbar straight at her. In a split heartbeat, Yashio launched himself right between them. He took the hit right on his own. The shockwave blasted through him, and he slammed hard onto the floor. Yama snapped at Yashio, calling him an idiot and blaming him for every single thing that went wrong. Yashio, writhing in agony, screamed at Seikka to flee before it was too late. She told them, "Don't move, I'm going to get help," and bolted. Hearing that, Yama lunged to grab her, but Yashio yanked hard on his leg, stopping him cold. Yama let out a sneer, his mind racing. Was Yashio really just trying to look cool in front of her? Fury surged through him as Yamaha slammed Yashio again, this time with a crowbar, snapping at him to stop meddling before everything spirals out of control. Yama lunged for the stop, and then out of nowhere a screen snapped up to block him. Yama's arms suddenly went numb, and he couldn't move a single one. Stunned, he couldn't help but wonder what the hell was happening. And then he spots a tiny yellow lizard right in front of him. He figured it was the culprit and shouted for it to stay away. But before he could even flinch, Yama crumpled to the floor in a flash, like the fight got ripped out of him, just like Yashinaga and his crew had done earlier. Seikka bolted straight to Yashio's side without a second to spare. Just like fate demanded it, the lizard sprang onto her. She screamed in terror and destiny. It crawled all over her, and she collapsed into a faint. Yashio can't move or speak anymore, and all he can do is watch helplessly. Destiny yanked out the potion Mullies had brewed, and the second Yashio swallowed it, the stuff was already inside his mouth. Yashio felt a jolt of raw energy rip through him, and his wound snapped shut fast. He sprinted toward Seikka, nearly collapsing with relief when he saw she wasn't hurt, just unconscious. Then he stared at Yama and suddenly realized he was stuck in the exact same nightmare state Yashinaga had been in. It felt like destiny was pulling every string from the shadows. Yashio's nerves were in overdrive, so he snatched his phone and couldn't stop himself from checking. Frantically checking, he tried to catch what had happened, sprinting back to his village in the game. Yashio glanced at his phone and saw a whole horde of monsters charging toward them. Gams blurted a panic-filled shout for everyone to sprint into the cave, and the whole crew scrambled inside without a second to spare. Staring at the problem, asking myself what move comes next. The monsters were already clawing their way through the fence. Gams snapped that it was just a matter of reaching the finish line, nothing more. Time was running out, and soon, everything would be totally wiped out. Chen reminded them, "Don't forget, we're still under the god of fate's protection." But Gams, choking on regret, swore he'd promised to protect every single one of them. And now he couldn't shake the feeling that it was straight up impossible. Carol's brows knit with confusion as worry surged. She demanded to know what on earth was happening. Mullies thrust a tiny potion into her hands and swore it would bring her rage down, so Carol gulped it. She tasted it, and just seconds later, her strength vanished as she fainted. Layla cradled Carol with a soft grip, murmured about mollusks to steady her, and told her that from now on her daughter would never have those terrifying thoughts again. Tears burst into their eyes, right on the edge of breaking. But just like that, Kem blurted out that they still had a shot, at least at saving one life. Everyone stared at her like, "Wait, what?" As she explained they hadn't given a tribute to the god of fate that day. If they decided to send Carol as their tribute. Chen clung to the idea that hope might still exist, but when everyone heard it, shock hit them like a punch. Because Gam had no other play left, he cut in. "There's no time. and threw them into it anyway, even if it sounded impossible to offer his tribute to a person. Layla shoved Carol right in front of the statue of the god of fate, pleading for his mercy and forgiveness after they completely blew their mission. Suddenly, a blinding burst of light exploded through the cave, lighting everything up. The summon golem ability exploded to life. They stared in shock as a gigantic golem crashed into view, gripping Carol tight in its hands. Yashio finally flipped the switch and brought it to life. Everyone cheered as the golem charged straight at the monsters, until Yashio spotted them boxed in around the cave, and he used the golem to smash through every last one. He didn't care if burning every single fate point was the price. He just bolted outside with a golem. Plowing through the monsters, he tore into them and wiped them out one by one. Gams erupted in cheers, urging the whole crew to fall in line behind the god of fate. Yashio didn't stop, he kept going. He spotted 3 red cyclops fighting their way through the horde. He decided to take the bigger monsters on solo, leaving the smaller ones behind so the others could take them. He stared down 3 cyclops head-on. He knew taking them all on at once was going to be brutal. He sprinted around, slamming kicks into a deadly target over and over, like he was hunting something that wouldn't stay down. He kicked up the dust, then slipped into the smoke to vanish, to sneak in and unleash stealthy shots at them. With the camera pulled back for a long-range view, he finally spotted his targets crystal clear. He launched into attacks from far away. He finally managed to drop one of the Cyclops. He snapped out of the last 2 attacks, then struck back in a blur, swinging in for another knockout. Now it all boils down to brutal one-on-one showdown. Both of them slammed forward at the same time, right as the Cyclops whipped its weapon around. He snapped out of the way, and then slammed right back with a crushing strike, driving a deadly strike straight into its face, and tearing through it. Yashio erupted in a burst of excited shouts, like he couldn't hold it in. Everyone's thrown into the celebration together, like the whole world just showed up at once. They tore through every last one of the smaller monsters and wiped them all out. The whole crew erupted in cheers, riding that sweet, victorious rush like they'd just won everything. Yashio jolted as Yama's phone blared an alert out of nowhere. Curiosity hit him. He snatched it up and froze when a game over message stared back at him. He sent a chilling message. Every single one of Yama's memories would be wiped clean. Shock hit Yashio like a punch. Yama never got told about any of it, and Yashio couldn't believe it, wondering if Yama would really erase everything that happened today. Even with everything running through his head, Yashio couldn't help feeling relieved, because Yama wouldn't remember the harm he'd done to those villagers. He couldn't help but wonder if Yamamoto's wild behavior was the game finally breaking his mind. Suddenly, Yama jolted awake, blinking in pure confusion, muttering that it was already getting late, and demanding where he even was. Yashio froze in shock and demanded, "Did you already forget?" Yashio spun a quick lie, telling Yama they were having a year-end party at his place, and that he'd crashed and fallen asleep. Yama swore he couldn't really remember anything clearly. But then, as night fell, a suspicious man suddenly showed up at his house. And then she hypnotized him, right there, like a switch flipping in his mind. Yama looked utterly lost, racking his brain over whether he'd had a drink at Yashio's place. Then Yashio snapped, stunned beyond words. Did someone have their hands on Yama's strings, making him tank the game? That thought dug into him hard, and Yama even asked if he'd broken anything while drunk, then offered to pay for every single damage. Yashio, still stunned out of his mind, couldn't believe people really would go that far just for a game. He shoved on a grin, then leaned in and reminded Yama he'd got big plans for New Year. Yama nodded, swallowed his guilt, and apologized for the hassle, then promised he'd head home. As he walked away, Yashio shouted, "Happy New Year," and sent him off. Yashio whipped around to Seikka and instantly scanned her, checking if she was really okay. She snapped her eyes open, cradled his face with gentle hands, and whispered, "Are you okay?" She spun around, totally baffled, and demanded answers about the lizard. Then Yashio laughed her anxiety off, told her to breathe, swore he wasn't hurt at all, and teased her for being wiped out from all that year-end cleaning. He kept it simple and told her, "Maybe you just had a nightmare." Seikka nodded hard, convinced it had to be a dream, because if it wasn't, she wouldn't be standing there totally unharmed. She brought up the lizard from her nightmare, totally oblivious that destiny was crouched right behind Yashio's hair. Seikka then dove into prepping their next meal, and together they rang in the new year in calm, peaceful bliss. A few weeks later, Yashio finally noticed it. Yama's wild act had calmed down, and everything was back to normal. He was grinding through his work, finally free from whatever had been haunting him, like it had been ripped out of his grasp. A dark influence crawled back into his life, just like it had before. Meanwhile, the villagers threw themselves into rebuilding everything, homes first, then repairing every facility the invaders had smashed. During the evil god's temptation, life in the village finally settled back into calm, and everyone looked genuinely at peace. With a grin brighter than sunlight, Carol proudly held up the carved figure she'd made, ready to offer it to the god of fate. Kem snapped with irritation at what he saw, but the village still roared back to life, thriving again. Right then, bam, someone knocked on the door. Sayuki and her dad stood there, and they'd come straight over to check out the lizard. Sayuki said, "If we post that adorable lizard on social media, it'll go viral for sure." But Yashio snapped back immediately. "No, you can't." He explains that the lizard is the village's prized specialty, hand-picked, carefully bred generations upon generations. He wondered in his gut that if the world Gams and the others live in is real, then every weird thing that's happened finally clicks. But if it's just a game, then he's got zero explanation. He couldn't wrap his head around it, why a game was tied to another world called the Village of Fate, and why that fate landed right in his lap. He couldn't stop replaying what Yama teased about another player, and it left his mind tangled and totally confused. The very next day, Seikka showed up at his house, geared up and raring to go, ready to drag him out with him. His mom teased him with a grin, asking him right out if he was headed for a date. Seikka said they were just heading out for sweets, and her mom teased that she wanted in too. Then Seikka blurted fast, "I mean, not really." Yashio shot that idea down instantly, insisting there was no such thing. He was only escorting her, nothing more, nothing to interrupt their moment. They burst outside and he asked, "Ready to move?" Seikka grinned and nodded, and the two of them headed out together. And that's how Yashio's story all began. After 10 brutal years, he finally became the god of fate, and he raced to save the villagers.